the lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light.
Monday, October 12. Thanks for watching What Are the Odds with the People's Pundit and Robert Barnes, who will be joining us shortly. Follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit. Follow Barnes at Barnes_Law. We're going to go over the Keystone State Battleground Poll today, which we started last week, rolled through the weekend. And look, this is prelim, but I think we can discern a little bit. There won't be that much waiting involved, but because the interest is so high, I'm going to share some results with you guys right now. Some things clearly with issues you could see. I mean, it won't matter how we weight them. I mean, the raw is pretty convincing, but some with the head-to-head and the generic ballot, I'm going to tell you guys to be a little bit careful what you discern from it, because raw data is funny, especially a state that's like Pennsylvania, where it's so different. You have 54 out of the 67 counties being Appalachia counties. The way that we targeted with region, we did this on purpose, because you could have central Pennsylvania and then ask about the margin in central Pennsylvania. Well, how much of that margin comes from Center County, out west, right? What's the margin in Western Pennsylvania, and how much of that comes from Allegheny? And then, of course, we will talk about the Philadelphia suburbs. Just again, raw and prelim. The final numbers will look different than what we are talking about today. And when Barnes gets in, I will pause and throw on my glasses because my contacts are killing me. All right. But for now, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right. People's Pundit Daily. You can do so right now. If you are on YouTube, hit that notification bell. It will let you know when we go live. This way you can wait in the queue and you don't miss anything good in the beginning of the show. All right. And then for those of you who are still on Facebook, mosey on over to Facebook to People's Pundit Daily. Click the like button. All right. Facebook Live is also a really good stream. If you're on Periscope, all you people who give us the stars and the hearts, super hearts or whatever they're called, we love you for it. All right. We love you for it. All right. But also, I will tell you that the streams are better on the other ones. We're no longer trying to, Periscope. We know what you guys, we received all of your stuff, but we will no longer try to work with them because we do not believe that they're doing so in good faith. We did everything that we asked for, that they asked for, but in the end, it wasn't happening. All right. So listen, hit that like button. So we got Barnes. With that, Barnes and I have been speaking a little bit about the results. All right. And then a lot of stuff will be new, brand new to him too. I just started processing the responses. We know we're going to keep. We're at about 1,000. Let me see. You know what? We're at about 1,001. We do have to go back out though tonight. It will change some when Barnes comes back. I saw he popped in and he popped back. Well, he'll be back in a second. But Erie County, Barnes and I were talking earlier today. It was light in Erie. It was light in Beaver. Even though our map looked beautiful, and we'll show you guys the map. But let's bring in Robert to say hello when he gets situated. And then when we do, I'll show you the distribution map, okay? In fact, let me bring it in and upload it. Just because I've been so critical of the New York Times Siena polling, you can clearly see where they have polled and where they have not, all right? And as somebody who does this for a living, I will tell you, of course it freaking matters. It does. And you will notice a very big difference in our sampling of independents and their sampling. We reached independents more around the rest of the state. They did not. It's just true. If you poll only in southeastern Pennsylvania and out west, your western sample is heavily skewed towards Allegheny, then you will find that the independent vote is a wider margin for a Democratic candidate. If you poll the rest of the damn state, you will find it is not. All right. So with that, let me bring in Robert and we'll talk about what the Raw says. Hey, Robert, what's going on?
Hey, good.
All right. So I was just giving them the intro spiel. You and I spoke a little bit about this. I wasn't going to do it until it was processed, but the interest in Pennsylvania is so high, Robert. I figured let's just bring it in. And I just gave them the warning that things will change when we process the data, right? Things will change. And but there's some things we can discern right away, especially in the issues. So about Amy Coney Barrett in the hearing, although I'm curious to see if that's going to change, because not that Robert and I want to tell you we told you so, but in case you aren't listening to the hearing today, we told you so. This has been all about pre-existing conditions and all about healthcare and why that's been so dangerous. We're going to show you in a second when we look at top issues. All right, so the Raw was like D+9. All right, D+10 or something. It was even 11, I think, on Saturday or Sunday until, there's just some people in there we have to parse out. 2016 was only D+3. All right, 2018 was D+5. All right, so and the exit polls have their own way of doing it. We tend to think that actually 2016 was more like D+4 or 5. It's just that Trump won a larger share of the Democratic vote, right, than people think. And a lot of those people now are just Republicans, Robert, and even the independents. Our independent margin is like unweighted. It's dead even, almost dead even. There is no 20-point blowout for Joe Biden in Pennsylvania. And in fact, last September, we had Trump leading with independents. And I won't be shocked when we wait for education to see Trump take the lead with independents by about 3 points or something like that. Why? Because this is where we polled, Nate. All right. And I'm going to show it. Oh, I got to pull this up. And then I wanted to put it on high charts just so you could see it exactly compared like he does, where you see the dots instead of the big blurbs like we have. But hold on. Let me bring this up for them, Robert, and show them where we polled. I showed this to Robert already. He already knows what it's going to look like, but very small area in the north where there's not a whole lot of responses. But for the most part, we did, I think, better than we did with the Epoch Times poll. All right. And while Robert's messing with that, all right. So here we have, this was at 964. Okay. And it looks much more filled in now. You could take your time to do that, Robert, because I'm going to show them this, right? But even though Erie out there in the Northwest looks dark, it's kind of relative. So for a county that's going to put out about 100 and something thousand votes, we need more than that, right? So it'll put out probably about 130, 140, actually, maybe even closer to upwards of 150. All right. And it was heavily out in Erie County and Beaver County. Beaver was like 70-30 female. So we want to go back out tonight. There's a couple of places in Bucks we would like to get a few more responses from, and Erie County, where we'd like to get a few more responses from. Allegheny, you could see Pittsburgh there, makes up a disproportionately big share of our Western Pennsylvania vote, which really shouldn't shock anybody, right? I mean, you saw that map, Robert, right?
Yep.
Allegheny makes up a lot, like too much. Even still, I can pull this thing up and show you guys Allegheny County. It's not that good for Joe Biden. So a couple of Democrats that we spoke with were really worried that they would not be able to adequately explain some of the stuff, the fracking, for instance, Robert, right? That they were going to have a hard time with that. And when we did Allegheny County, we could see what they're worried about. All right. And let's pull this up. Let me get in which county, more specifically, in which county do you live? All right. And look, Joe Biden's going to carry Allegheny, folks. All right. No damn shocker there. He's going to carry Allegheny County. But let me show you what the margin is, what we got. There we, and by the way, Biden's killing it on the early vote and early in person. Donald Trump is killing it on election day. So no shocker there. But out of Allegheny County, and this is working for. But anyway, let me just give them the margin. Donald Trump, 35.3. So a little bit below his 2016 with 7% undecided. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at 55.9. So roughly, this better start working because I want to show this to them. Roughly not much different than 2016 in the entire Philadelphia suburbs that we keep hearing about, right? Just to pull this up again, let me get rid of county by county. Let's do region. In the entire Philadelphia suburbs, a lot of media polls are showing what? 20 point or more, right? What did the New York Times, do you remember this, Robert?
35-point lead.
35 points. Okay. Yeah, we didn't find that. Okay, so saving this filter, it is 50.4 for Joe Biden, 37 for Donald Trump. Let me let you guys in on a little secret. That's about what it was in 2016. Okay. Only Donald Trump was a little bit higher. Joe Biden was a little bit higher. So when you figure you get those people who decide, there's about 9.2% who are undecided. Joe Jorgensen's taking 3.4. When you put that together, you're looking at a similar 13, 14 point spread, Robert.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the other big area, for several reasons on the Pennsylvania poll for folks that at least as to what I'm looking at, it's not so much the top line for the whole state, though, that has some bearing, but I'm more curious about certain regions and curious about also one of the reasons to do this was to provide confirmation as to the difficulty of polling in the modern era.
Mm-hmm.
So because one of the reasons why we highlighted Nate Cohn's map, which he didn't understand the problems with, and he put out more maps today about all of the states, even showed where ballot, I'll get into that, about where votes were flipping and so forth, is that it's important to get certain underlying demographics, and it's important for people to understand. Like, I know there's Rush Limbaugh and others who sort of have a theory that these are deliberately manipulated polls and so forth. And there's an argument for that on the media narrational side, and how the Nate Silvers and the Nate Cohns reinforce that by who they punish and who they reward. But I think that's not what's actually happening with the pollster themselves most of the time. What's happening is the pollsters are going into the field for 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
And they're using sometimes limited modes and methods. And that what they're getting is they're not getting representative samples from a voting basis. In other words, again, the whole art of polling is you talk to one person and he tells you how that group is going to 100,000 in his group is going to vote. There's a big difference between a blue collar worker in Lucerne County and a middle class Bucks County. They're just not the same demographic. They're not trending the same way. You can have two rural voters, but if one of them's a librarian who hates Trump and the other one is your classic blue collar ex-miner, totally different groups. So you need to know that to know how representative sampling you're going to get. And the Obama pollsters figured this out back in 2012. That's why they only polled certain representative groups. They didn't even poll whole states. This cat came out of the bag after the 2012 election. But so the goal is I think the main reason for the problem of polls since 2000 and really aggressively since 2014, but it percolated up before then. But once there was a big class divide, once there was a big culture divide, going back to Harry Truman's race in 1948, is that certain groups are just not responding to polls.
That's right.
And the reason why Richard's doing 7 days, 8 days, 9 days in the field, I think he started last Tuesday, is because 2-3 days will just not get responses. And it's the reason that you use different modes. It's the reason to use different methods, but also you just have to wait longer to get representative samples of certain demographic groups. And you have to know that just having them, what's ironic is Nate Cohn is making the exact same mistake that was later attributed to the reason Gallup missed 1948. Not only Gallup missed it, there was a Roper poll, there was a Crossley poll, there were other polls that were even more off. One of them had Dewey up 13 points on the eve of election. He lost by 6 points, whatever.
No, almost 6. Yeah.
So you're talking about a 19-point error, folks. And they had that poll all the way through. Was because what they called quota sampling, and the problem wasn't quota sampling. Everybody does quota sampling. You'll see some bad arguments out there about quota sampling being bad. The problem was what their quota was. They assumed any white guy in a rural area was representative of all rural white voters.
Yep.
So they just missed. And that's exactly what Nate Cohn did to defend his map.
And that's why he's going to be wrong in Greene County, Robert.
Yeah,
Robert, one of the first things you pointed out is 2-1 in Greene County.
Yeah,
we have a 20+ point lead for Donald Trump in Greene County. We specifically went after that county more just because you and I had spoken about it. And I was like, you know what? Let's oversample Greene County. Let's see what it comes back. And shocker, in the beginning, when we had like 15 responses, it was Biden, and then as it became not 60-40 female, not people in Greene County, folks, don't make $100,000 on the norm. All right. So, so as that stuff started to come in, shocker, it went to Trump. And by the way, Robert, check this out. While you were talking, I clicked on this. I just wanted to put the three together because the Northeast is being thrown. Like, for instance, the last blue bastion in the northeastern part of the state, holding on like can be, all right, is going pretty well for Biden. And we just simply don't have that much response rate there. But we did target Luzerne, Lackawanna, and Monroe because of the changes in Monroe and because Trump almost took Monroe last time. So, and then of course, Lackawanna was the last of the great working class areas for Democrats. Those three counties combined, which is nice sample. You have to, the problem is if you get one or two of them, it's not enough. Overall, Trump is up 52-44 in those three counties combined. So
I'm trying to do my reverse mapping. So that book behind me is about Pennsylvania realignment politics, and what Richard's talking about is these counties up. Well, I can't do it. Now I see why you struggle doing that. That is reverse mirroring. Oh, there it is. I got it. Look at I accidentally got it.
That's it. He's right where I'm talking about right now.
There you go. And that map was written after 2012. I think it was 2012, maybe 2008. But you can see this was the heart of the Democratic firewall was twofold in Pennsylvania. It was the working class areas up in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre.
Yep.
in the Northeast, the industrial Northeast, and then it was the old black coal country in Southwest and the West, and they've lost that entirely, and that's why Greene County is just representative of that for the folks that it's literally right on the corner, southwest corner of Pennsylvania, the heart of black coal country. And by that I mean that's what they used to call that part of Appalachia. Effectively, it's almost extended Appalachia. Heavy coal mining, heavy coal mining. Now into fracking. I went and visited there, and what's fascinating about it is that's a place where your college-educated voter can actually be more Republican than the norm, or trend more with their local community than say your Montgomery County voter, because it was fascinating. They all live in the same area. So like you had a trailer park and you went 2 blocks up and you were in the upper middle class part of Greene County. So they're more communitarian. They can't ignore the problems of their neighbors, and they're more culturally diverse. That's the reason why Olmsted built parks the way he did in New York City. The goal was to create democratized society by force feeding social cultural interaction. Of course, that got killed in New York because the upper middle class took over the whole Manhattan. But that's the idea of the residential patterns in places like Greene County. And so, as an example, one of the cone problems that was easy to identify was that in Greene County, I think his sample size was tiny, and he had 2-to-1 Democrats. And it was like, okay, right away you should know you didn't get a representative sample of that whole, because it's not just Greene County. Many of the counties to its east and many of the counties to its north, particularly the rural parts of Washington, and then all the way up through parts of Beaver and parts of western PA, represent, and even parts of northeastern Pennsylvania, represent a coal country, fracking-oriented, ancestrally democratic, working-class populism. And they're going to vote differently than central Pennsylvania, or than Pennsylvania Dutch, or than suburban Philly, whichever side of suburban Philly that is, or even Pittsburgh. So it's important to know that voting group, that and when Cohn got those results back, he should have recognized.
It should have immediately been a flag, Robert. Immediately.
He did not have a representative sample. And here's my guess. It's like all these YouTubers that are on. It's sad. I subscribe to a bunch of these election YouTubers, and all they do is repeat what they see on Nate Silver and Nate Cohn's sites. It's like they don't know how to do what Kevin Phillips did. There are people who I guarantee you haven't even read it. If that Pennsylvania realignment book I have to my left, my guess is Nate Cohn's never read it. Nate Cohn's probably never reviewed it. Nate Cohn probably doesn't even know the difference between when he said, hey, I got a fair sampling of rural. It's like, wow, you're not getting the point.
It dawned on me at that moment, Robert, that he doesn't know what he's doing. That's when it dawned on me. I was like, oh my God, he really doesn't know. Like when I was trying to explain to him, listen to me, Nate, for 1 second. This is why you got Florida wrong. Okay, let me explain to you what you're not really grasping. I'm not talking about the census and rural is this much percent. I am not. You don't have adequate subgroup sampling. So forget about rural. That's not good enough. And that is an artifact of your polling mode. It was a pain, and it was a real SOB, man, to get all those people in Greene County. It took us 3 days. And to specifically go after them. And some strange things, though, Robert, just to give because truth, people are commenting. They want to know. I have learned my lesson about commenting on Raw. It's like it's like a D plus 11. And let me just put it. The Raw is favorable to Democrats, as in who did we sample? It's overall favorite. And Biden's lead is like 6-7 points in the Raw. So if you want my best guess, although don't hold me to it if tomorrow it's a few points different, but if you want my best guess, it's like Biden 2, Biden 3, like that's, and by the way, that's well within the sampling. It's like 3.1. Berks, for instance, Trump won it last time. Robert, although it's one of those counties that seem to be slipping away from Republicans little by little, Berks won it last time, yet he's winning Chester in this poll. He's ahead in Chester. He's down now in Bucks a little bit. We had him up in Bucks last month. That's why I want to go back out and get Bucks, because if you plot where we got him in Bucks, they're all along the damn border. And then to the east in Trenton, they're everywhere. So I'm even shocked it's like Biden 7 in Bucks right there, or whatever it is right now. So I mean, but weirdly, because
Bucks has such a cross section within it.
Yeah, we missed the northern.
Like unlike Greene County, like Lucerne, Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, where Lucerne and Lackawanna and Monroe are basically located. they really are all very like if you get a good sampling out of those counties, you have a good sampling of the vote that's representative of those counties.
Right.
A county where that's not true is Bucks. So
Yeah.
Bucks County is a very diverse county within it. So you have an upper middle class section of Bucks that borders Montgomery, and part of which borders one part of the mainline district in Philadelphia. Then you have another part that borders the district and borders Trenton that can be working class, and near Levittown, the famous Levittown, they wrote the book about the modern American suburb back in the 50s and 60s is in Bucks County. Then you get to the rural and northern parts of Bucks County, and it can be in small townish almost.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of working class republicanism that looks like other parts of the state. So it's a very big cross section in Bucks. And it's hard to get a representative sample out of Bucks unless you're really careful and really diligent. And so and that's where the goal of all of this has been to get representative cross samples in wide-ranging constituencies that forecast the overall election. The top line number can be influenced by various things, so I'm more curious about those underlying numbers. Unless is he getting completely crushed? I mean, what they were predicting, what Cohn
we don't see that.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't see that. We see, honestly, this is not the told story of the 2018 midterm. There were areas, not across the country, but in certain states, including in the Rust Belt, there were areas where Democrats made gains in more rural areas. There were, not in like Florida. They got killed in Florida.
They ran double digits ahead throughout the entire northern working class.
And I'm looking at it, Robert, and it's like, I don't think he's going to be able to pull back Obama's coalition. But, to win for Biden, he's going to have to pull back Chester, do a little bit better in Bucks. Like I said in the first damn show that we did the voter analysis in Pennsylvania, he will have to win there, and he'll have to win them with independents because, again, shocker, if you poll independents in the southeastern part of the state, they're going for Biden by double digits. If you poll independents in the West, they're going for Trump by, 11 points. It depends on which region you're in. And then, of course, that offsets. Just so people understand, Philadelphia itself is 12%, 10% of the vote. Just so people understand how much they harp on. And those burbs are maybe a fifth, which is a big chunk. Don't get me wrong. It's a big chunk. But what I'm saying is, Hillary beat him there. If you put those counties together that constitute the Philadelphia burbs in the Southeast, she beat him there by 13 points. We currently have him down by 14 points. That's roughly, guys, the sampling error is going to be 3%, it's well within that. Could it be a little worse for Trump? Sure. And guess what? Lackawanna could be a lot better for him. We don't know, so these things iron out, man. I see Biden doing better in some areas, and it's not, and that are more, they weren't Clinton friendly. They just weren't, and that may not even hold. It's also the Robert is very. People are like, well, is it too liberal? You know what it is? It's too moderate. It's very moderate. And those moderate voters. That's another clue. Damn, it's not at least 30% conservative. Nope. So that's another clue that's not right. And for those who want to know how we got within tens of percentage points in 2016, this is how we did it. We broke Pennsylvania up into 5 different states, and that's how we got that damn close. And that's what we intend to do again. It's just that there's no doubt, Robert, this time around, it's harder, man. It's harder.
Yes. Two things have happened. Online polling has now imitates the online methodology. Now imitates live phone methodology.
Yeah.
So that the online presented was a more conservative leaning audience in 2016, and
I agree.
So when you had an online poll mixed with a live phone poll, you'd get some balance. In addition, if you were doing all three yourself, you're doing some online, doing some texting, doing some cell phone, doing some landline, doing some IVR. IVR is automated phone. The other thing is automated is now harder because they've made the do not call
the laws.
Much stricter. So that's why a lot of polling that worked for 2016 is not even available in 2020 because who's responding to the poll has changed. So my view was 2020's polls should inflate the Biden edge, the Democratic margin, rather than decrease it, because of these changes in modes and methods, and also change in it, a continuing decline in response rates. And
can I
Trump
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can talk about the
I just wanted to jump in and then take it again while I try to fidget with something over here. But in 2018, because I was answering a lot of questions on Twitter yesterday, and Doug jumped in, and Doug was like, guys, what the hell are you talking about? Here's 2016. Don't look at the Real Clear Politics table. I love RCP, but the fact of the matter is they adjusted after the election to make things look a little bit better. Robert knows it. I know it. I've got screenshots. I mean, I could prove it, so, and if you want to go look and see like a more collective, you could go to Wikipedia, and they will collect a lot of things that you wouldn't even see on RCP to give you a better idea of how the narrative was panning out. And this idea, Robert, that the ABC News tracker did not start at Hillary plus 12 is bogus. It did. So the Biden plus 12 yesterday should shock nobody. That's how they started their tracker as well last time, right? And then Josh from a hotline, Josh from National Journal was exactly the guy that they used to run to start pushing the headlines that Republicans are abandoning Trump. I mean, it's a complete repeat. And then as I was telling people, the only difference is we maybe should expect it to be worse, because in 2018, the state level polling was even worse than it was in 2016. And I keep harping on that, but I said that during the midterm. Look, who the hell cares what the House vote? No offense, but who the hell cares what the National House vote said, which overestimated Democrats. But who cares? Because this is an election decided by the states. And if we can't get the states correctly, we can't tell people what's going on, right? And there wasn't a single public poll until Robert dropped DeSantis plus 13 in Florida. I mean, Quinnipiac was a 8-point miss. I mean, plus 7 for both candidates. We've gone over this already. My point is, folks, what Robert's saying is entirely plausible. We should expect, as polling gets harder, for bigger misses to go. And what you were saying, we were just having a conversation with Sint and Dineta, other panel providers. The working hypothesis right now is that it really is getting much worse with how liberals have flooded panels and how they're overrepresented because of COVID. And they just have nothing, people have nothing else to do but sign up for YouGov, man. Sign up for Sint Insights, right? And they're just taking crap, man, to get $3, I mean, or whatever it is.
Key factor out there also is they're no longer using the weighting controls that they used in 2016. Some like YouGov nationally weighted their poll results by the 2012 results. So whatever group they were polling was Obama plus 4. They're not doing that in 2020. The same USC weighted their results by 2012. So their panel was always coming back Obama plus 4. And what that did is that controlled these variables so that they didn't get some crazy numbers or much variability in general. Neither one are doing that. Also, a bunch of people that were polling in states and nationally are not this cycle, as far as I can tell. I don't see Remington out there. I don't see Harper polls being published. I don't see a range of polls being published. So what I do is I compare like polls. So I compare, look at online to online, look at live phone to live phone, look at IVR to IVR, look at mixed mode to mixed mode, look at whether it's a media university sponsored poll or not, separating out ones that have a distinctive history, like Susquehanna in Pennsylvania has always been more accurate. All the others in Pennsylvania have been bad.
Looks like we're going to be right in the ballpark of them. Honestly, well within, that's where we're probably gonna fall. I mean, it's my best guess, Robert. Right now.
And the other factors, here's for everybody out there. New York Times, it's amazing. Cohn managed not to comment on it, and I thought about telling them, and I was like, I'll just tell it to this audience. Keep it more exclusive. For instance, everybody can subscribe to People's Pundit Daily News, so you can help support PPD, but also get this kind of information on a regular basis. For folks out there, the one giveaway, and I'll get into what I'm tracking in the voter registration, what I'm tracking in early voting. I do it differently than most other people do. But as an example, early voting, I always like to cross-check it against polls, because a giveaway that a poll is going to be off is it's going to have a group of voters that have already voted that's completely inconsistent with the early voting data.
That's what the raw is here, Robert. That's why I'm hoping the weighting works that out. So funny you said that. We absolutely have an inconsistent result in this sample. Yeah.
And what it is the kind of people who did early vote on the Democratic side, especially, are the ones who can't wait to respond to a poll.
Yeah.
And it's inflating the results. And I'll give you the examples. The New York Times, and ironically, Nate Silver unintentionally made the point that you could test a poll's accuracy by how well it was getting the partisan profile of those who had already voted within a state. And
Speaking of which, while Robert's talking, everybody just take a look at that.
Oh, yes, exactly. That's a famous Nate Cohn prediction about what early vote would mean in North Carolina in 2016.
Uh-huh.
And part of it was because his internals were wrong.
Yeah.
There was a misleading. He had the indicator right in his own data back in North Carolina in 2016. His definition of who had voted didn't match the voter profile. So for those out there, the early voting this year is different than, of course, any other year in the past. And some people are trying to, and so there's an organization, Democratic vendor called Target Smart, that is keeping track of the data, and it uses the voter file. It has its own voter profile, so there's some arguments about that. But for the most part, those voter files are pretty close to accurate. You can argue about whether they inflate one party or the other a little, but it tends to be small margins that they do so. That most people use the same set of data and information to profile voters. So Wisconsin and Michigan don't keep party registration. So in order to know its party profile, you have to go to a voter file vendor like Target Smart. But anybody can do it. Go online, look up Target Smart, early voting, and you can look up all their data on a daily basis by county, by state, by congressional district, nationally. It's a Democratic vendor, so he's pushing Democratic talking points in the press, but you can ignore that. And I'm looking at other kinds of data, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But just to give you a snapshot of this as it relates to the polls, the New York Times polls released today, done over last week, mostly the weekend, by the New York Times in Michigan and Wisconsin. In Michigan, they report people who said they had already voted.
Yep.
According to their poll, there should be a 3-to-1 advantage amongst Democrats in Michigan, and there should be a 5-to-1 advantage for Democrats in Wisconsin. Well,
we have 2-to-1 here. We have 2-to-1 here, and we know it's not right.
Well, in
the raw, maybe that. Yeah.
Well, in Wisconsin and Michigan, and there's varying data all over the place depending on which state it is. So Pennsylvania 2-to-1 actually may be accurate, but at least as to who has voted so far.
Okay.
But it's only about 5% of the vote. And so they got about. I was first curious, maybe they got too many of those people in the sample. It wasn't so much that, because they had about the right percentage of people who'd already voted. Be like Cohn to weight that probably too. But the giveaway was he was saying 3-to-1 Democratic advantage in Michigan, 5-to-1, and there we have data we can cross check it against.
We know that's flatly not true.
Completely. In Michigan and Wisconsin, it's dead even in both states. In both states, and I have a theory about that I'll get to. So
get to it, because people ask me a lot about it.
So two things with early voting. One, I ignore any state. One, this year we're going to get a record set of absentee voting. That's how they label it inside their voter file. Do not look at the past profile. So on the data, it will show you 2016 and 2018. That's mostly useless because they're just tracking absentee voting. And absentee voting was so small in past elections that it's not really going to tell you a lot. So that's part one. Part two, I see people looking at data, like a whole bunch of people were upset about Pennsylvania. And I was like, it's 4.5% of the vote, folks. So I wouldn't pay any attention to that at that juncture anyway. Wait until at least 10% of the vote is in, then look at what's happening. Now, when I look at early voting, I don't look at it for partisan profile, except to see whether it's within the range of anticipation. And this year, according to these same polls, the advantage we should see is what happened in the Pennsylvania primary, which there was a state legislative district within bucks.
Evaporated anyway.
Yeah. Well, in the early vote was 64-29 Democrat prior to Election Day, according to the party registration data. On Election Day, the Republicans so outnumbered Democrats that when they counted all the ballots, it actually had a more Republican lean than the district did. So that's what I would anticipate seeing based on self-reported how I'm going to vote according to these polls, is I would expect to see a 2 to 3-to-1 advantage amongst mail-in balloting in these states. Now, I'm not paying tons of attention to that because you can have differential organization in different states. You can have people responding at different times. You have, in terms of when they got the ballot, when something was open, so forth. There is I totally ignore voting pattern amongst older voters because they always vote. People over 65, to give people a turnout sense.
Yeah.
The variation has been between 69 and 70% since 2004. Okay. So they always vote no matter what. Your turnout variable groups is what I look for. Because to give folks an idea, the problem with trying to do tea leaves with early voting is there's a high probability that one party or the other is disproportionately cannibalizing their election day vote. And it's going to be really crazy this year because Democrats are disproportionately saying they will do early voting, particularly mail-in balloting. Republicans are disproportionately saying they won't do it, as you've been documenting.
We got crazy numbers in Pennsylvania, Robert. Crazy numbers. I'm trying to put this while you're talking, put it together to show people because it's nuts. And actually, you know what? I can abandon. We can always go back to the I could just do it. This is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very archaic, I guess. But if we just take party here, and before Robert moves on, we should look at this just to give you guys an idea of what he's talking about. All right, this is very, very archaic, but let's go up while it's going to put a segment in. All right, so there's Republican, Democrat, Independent. Ignore the colors, folks. They don't matter. Okay, so we're thinking about certain already. Where are we here? Are you registered? Yes. How likely are you to? Here we go. All right, so maybe you can see it. Maybe you can't. All right, Republican, Democrat, Independent, something else. All right. Yeah, they can see it. So Republicans, only 8% told us that they voted already by absentee ballot or early voting. 26.8% said they plan to vote either before election day, either by absentee or early voting. That compares to 21.6% of Democrats who said they did already vote, and another 46.9% who say that they intend to vote before election day. 65% of Republicans say they plan to vote on election day. That compares to just over 30% of Democrats. Even, by the way, 54.8% of independents plan to vote on election day. 17% said, which is still more than Republicans, but less than Democrats. They say that they voted already. You can count on them to be more liberal and then plan to vote before election day, whether by absentee or early voting in their area, another basically quarter, 27.6. So you will see independents as the vote comes in. The independents will be very liberal in the beginning and then tighten and tighten and tighten and tighten. And that's how this will go. And it's almost how it always goes. But the disparity this time is ginormous, Robert. And then Gallup, look at Gallup. I mean, look at the disparity now. 62% of Democrats to only 28% of Republicans. Very consistent, by the way, with what we found in Pennsylvania. 8 and 26.
Gallup Day is particularly useful because it shows that in the past, it was about an even number of Democrats and Republicans nationally to vote early. This year, it's what people are expecting is a 2.5 to 1 advantage nationwide for Democrats based on that self-reporting information in the early vote, particularly the mail-in balloting portion.
Yeah.
Some states have in-person early voting, some states do not. And so measuring it against that backdrop, but with the caveat that I'm deeply skeptical of partisan data in general, because of you can have parties organizing in one state and not another state. You could have one party organizing and not the other. You can have both parties organizing. You can have states where they're familiar with it, states where they're not, states that did it in the primary, states that didn't. So you're going to have so much differential. It's hard to read the tea leaves beyond looking at, first, what I look at is age. Second, I look at is race. Third, I focus on the voter file profile of the percentage of voters and what the profile looks like of those who have never voted before, knowing that never voted would usually lean heavily Democratic. But particularly if the New York Times assumption, the Pew assumption, now Pew didn't project them to actually likely vote. They wouldn't by their traditional metrics, but their registered voter poll, all of these polls have a lot of them, 2/3 of their lead come from 2016 non-voters. And so what I've been looking at is I look at are we getting an unusual share of young vote in the youth vote, in the early vote? Are we getting an unusual share of African American vote? Now, that will be harder to read this year because there's clearly a huge effort to get black voters to vote early on the Democratic side.
Yes.
And a lot of white Republicans who you normally do are not going to. So I anticipate better norms, but looking at it from that perspective, and then monitoring white working class support in different places, because you can actually use that metric for the voter file that's now publicly available at TargetSmart and things like that. But one easy, convenient way out of the gate is just to measure it against existing polls. So they got a bad sample. We know they got a bad sample in Michigan and Wisconsin because according to New York Times, in the early vote, Democrats should have somewhere between a 30 and 60 point lead.
Yeah.
And even. So right away, we know their poll was bad. According to Nate Silver, who accidentally admitted this, he said you can tell the polling accuracy by what's actually happening in the early voting data. So that's one of the ways I use the early voting data. The main areas is I look at turnout trending. What are low turnout groups doing? If there's going to be a youth surge, it will show up in the early vote. If
we don't have it. I'll just drop that bomb on you now. We got the youth vote is going to be projected to be about 14.2, which is down from 16 in 16% in 2016, right? 18 to 24 was 8%, 25 to 29 was 8%. We dug into this really deep when we were, creating this this quota. We wanted to make sure we got them, and we did. We got them first. We had no problem actually this time reaching them. The problem is they are the most likely to tell us, I'm not voting this year.
Right. Well, there's tons of data points on this. So I've been tracking the early vote across the country, and the youth vote is down everywhere. So it's not up, it's down. And so there's no sign of a youth surge, number one. Number two, there's no sign of a never voted surge. If the Democratic mail-in balloting strategy and this is what most of the people like Larry and other people on the right are identifying. Now, Larry's a bit of a partisan, so you can always filter it through that.
And there's no doubt about that, man.
But others that associated with Larry have pointed this out as well, or others in this same sort of conservative data space. And they were looking at the early voting compared to what the public opinion polls were predicting. Public opinion polls are predicting 2-to-1, 3-to-1 advantages in the early vote. Yeah. And they're looking at swing states, even nationwide, and they're seeing in most places of those states that have 10% or more of their ballots already in, and there's about 8 of them. In Michigan and Wisconsin, they're running way behind the Democratic expectation. In Minnesota, they're running about to Democratic expectation, but a little bit below their expectation. Pennsylvania doesn't have enough vote. Iowa doesn't have enough vote yet. North Carolina has it's still a little bit under. Virginia is running a little bit running a little bit below expectation, above their normal numbers, but below their expectation. And it was in almost all these places, rather than running 20 to 30 points ahead of the historic norm for states that do have a history of substantial early voting, they're Democrats, even in the states where it's going well for them, like Florida and Virginia, and to some degree North Carolina, they're running about 10 points ahead. And then if you look at the underlying demographics, what I'm wondering is, are they just cannibalizing their traditional Democratic vote that would vote on election day and just voting this way now? One way I measure that is looking at the age profile, looking at the demographic profile. And their African-American vote is actually below what it was in 2016 so far in North Carolina. The youth vote is below what it even was in 2016. So they're not getting new voters out. They're not getting the way in which the Democratic vendor on this, people may point to, hey, the TargetSmart guy, he says it's good. He's congregating data. He's doing the national data. He's throwing in infrequent voters, and he's not telling you whether those were 2016 non-voters. And he's not telling people, and even then the lead is like 10 points. I was like, that's not a big lead, because the never voted before group by itself should be a 20 to 30 point Democratic group. And particularly if their strategy was working of getting new votes through mail-in balloting, that should be a 40 to 50 point edge, and it should be twice as high as a percentage of the early vote than it is.
Yeah, guys, we're talking 75-25 here. That's what it should. That's the break. Yeah, that's what they would need. And
so I look at early voting just to see how much is their ballot organization strategy working. No evidence it's working anywhere, frankly. They're underperforming even in their debates. Here's the other thing. Now, I will be watching a lot 2 states because they're massively participating in mail-in balloting this year. Number 1, and number 2, because there's no organization going on by either party, because they're not considered
Organic as hell.
Exactly. So they're not. So there's nothing to be manufactured out of it. There's no big Senate race. They're not considered competitive at the Electoral College, and those 2 states are North Dakota and South Dakota. So there I will track partisan data and track socioeconomic data and track new voter data, because I'm curious and interested, because there's a more organic test. Now, even though they're more Republican leaning states, so you have to adjust for that fact. What you're looking at is, are Republicans overperforming or underperforming in otherwise turnout vulnerable groups? These are working class whites, especially in those 2 states. So to give you some numbers, let me take a look at it. Wrote them down. Right now in so far in both North Dakota and South Dakota, I think it's over 20%, something like that, have voted. The Republican lean in South Dakota amongst early votes is 19 points.
Jeez.
And in North Dakota, it's 47 points.
Oh my goodness. That's way.
The other reason
the
reason I monitor the Dakotas is that part of the Dakotas, of course, have a big Norwegian vote. So they vote like Minnesota, rural Minnesota, and they vote like Western Wisconsin. And it's been my longtime thesis that it's very hard to get Norwegians to respond to polls, and it's why there's been whenever Norwegians have voted differently than the rest of the state or differently than their historic norm, that's when polling errors tend to occur in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Go back to Gallup, 2004, kept saying Bush was going to win Wisconsin by 8. And he barely lost it.
Yeah,
they were missing that voter group, and so and things like, and then the second thing, like in Wisconsin. Here's my hypothesis. I was like, why is Minnesota showing signs of a good Democratic organization, get out the vote operation, and mail voting? Pennsylvania is showing a very good Democratic operation. North Carolina is. Florida is. Early signs of Arizona, though they just got really started, and yet you're not seeing it in Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, or Wisconsin.
Republicans are actually killing it if you look at Target Smart, and they're killing it in Ohio. So everyone was like bashing me with the raw data we showed on here on this show. It was R plus 10, man, in Ohio. Now, I wasn't trying to claim the electorate would be. I'm simply saying that was what the raw showed. When it was weighted for demographics, it only ticked it down a little bit. I had to be extremely favorable to Joe Biden. I think for those who watch the show, they know I weighted it down to like R plus 3 or something to get it competitive, to be within that era. So, just so people know, got this up. We're going to go over some issues too. And Robert asked if we could add ancestry to this. So I did. And there's some pretty interesting, even though it's raw, and what you guys to understand this, when we wait for other things, for instance, it may say right now, which it does, that Donald Trump is carrying Polish ancestral groups in Pennsylvania 53-40. That may change when we wait for education and region. It may change, and that will, not that it may, it will change it. It's just a matter of how much. Italians, for instance. So Trump is doing well against Scot-Irish, Polish, Italian, actually just non-Scot-Irish Catholics. That is a Biden category by about 6 points, but that may change. Trump is carrying Germans, which is the largest ancestral group. French, 60-40. He's actually losing the English a little bit, and Dutch carrying it a little bit. So when we wait for that, the reason why I'm like always reluctant to show people this stuff is because it's going to change when I wait, and people don't say, "Well, wait a minute, you showed this, and now it's something different," So that's why, because I'm going to make sure that Allegheny is not too much of a percentage of the that vote. And by the way, the Italian slant towards liberal. This is something I was looking at before the show. So I'm like, why is Bucks like this and Chester Trump and Bucks not? And it's in fact going in the other direction from September. Looking into it, Robert, the liberal Italian representation is off the roof. And of course, you know, and I know that Italians are not a liberal group, you know,
Right.
so that's why. And who is in Bucks? Who populates the hell out of South Bucks, right? Italians, working class Italians. So look, it's a great example of how things could be, thrown off by a simple, and believe you me, nobody else is drilling into this stuff. I'm glad Robert asked me to do Ancestral, because that was really cool. And we were watching it come in. But Robert, you can't help but to look at some of this stuff and say to yourself, you know, it's really, a lot has to do with the media, I know, but you can't help but to look at this and say to yourself, damn, the messaging on the Republican side really stinks, right? So if we get rid of the Republican comparison, Democrat comparison, let's just look at the top issues, see what the top issues do here. Okay. All right. And then ranking is always different, of course. The economy and jobs, number one at 33. Coronavirus ticked a little bit higher from last month to 25%. That's the media, because Pennsylvania was not that affected by coronavirus. That is the media. And that is a testament to the sample being too moderate and too liberal as compared to, you know, previous exit polls that tell me I'm way below on conservatives. So that's another reason why we want to go out a little bit more. But in Bucks, I'm going to try to reach just those people to see if that's different. It may or may not be, and it may just be a weighting issue. But anyway, so those are your top three categories. The rest is policing, crime, and safety. But we ask people to rank them, and you guys should know this right by now, because it gives you a much better understanding of where everyone's intensity really lies. And coronavirus falls below healthcare when we do that, and policing and crime starts to race right up on it. Here's the deal with that, Robert. Today's hearing, and I'm going to preview this because you and I talked about the danger with Amy Coney Barrett getting turned into an argument about pre-existing conditions. When you're dominating the first most important issue and the fourth most important issue, that's great. But when you're getting killed among the second and third most important issues, and then you let your political enemies bring it up again, right? You could lose, even though the electorate still trusted you on the most important ones and basically everything else. And we're going to see it. They trust him on Supreme Court appointments more than Biden. They trust him on terrorism and national security. This is a raw D plus 10, 11 sample or whatever it is. They trust him more on policing, crime and safety, economy and jobs, and immigration. But on healthcare, coronavirus, race relations, and the environment, he's getting killed. And it tells you that you made a strategic error. You did. And then look at this. We're asking people whether or not they agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's philosophy or Amy Coney Barrett's. 60.4% in the raw chose judicial restraint over judicial activism when given the definitions. Okay. That'll change again. All this will change when it's weighted, but it's overwhelming in the raw, which is a very pro-Democrat raw. When asked whether or not they should give her a hearing, just like Florida, 49.4%, 39.2%, no. So the media is wrong, at least in the battleground states, because this is a second battleground state we polled and asked whether or not, you know, we should just wait for the winner of the election to choose the next. They don't want to. They say give her a hearing.
Yeah, actually, the New York Times poll did confirm that today.
They did, right?
Yeah, so
give her a hearing.
Their polling data said that favorable to confirmation, favorable to a hearing. Yeah. But yeah, the problem with Barrett was always going to be the issues that she would raise. Yeah. And that the Republicans were stuck their head in the sand, and that because they all follow the Federalist Society and everybody's scared to deviate and question, this is why Republicans nominate worse judges consistently than Democrats, less reliable judges consistently than Democrats, because they refuse to broach dissent. You're not allowed to dissent about a judicial nomination and on the right. And it's a problem. It's a huge problem. It's led to 30 years of mistakes. It's led to having a 7-2 Supreme Court majority at one point and still doing nothing about abortion, when that's the whole reason you got those court positions in the first place. So, and the problem with Barrett, and I see people responding, two things happened today. As we forecast, all they were going to talk about was pre-existing conditions. They weren't going to talk about her Catholicism. That was a complete red herring. It was never going to go that route. And and what I feared turned out to be true. Republicans were completely unprepared for it because they're writing prepared speeches as if the Democrats had just spent 3 hours attacking her religion. And when everybody's watching, it's like, what in the world are Republicans even talking about? None of the Democrats even mentioned anything about her religion. So they're not ready to answer the main attack. And the main attack is pre-existing conditions. And even
they got outsmarted today.
Completely. And it's amazing how their echo chambers are so small on these kind of issues that no one will broach dissent on this. And it's you can be for Barrett all you want. The point was there was bad political preparation. It wasn't a matter of them sitting back and saying, well, and I see some people responding saying, oh, the Democrats would have always done this. Go back and tell me about all the times that Kavanaugh was asked about pre-existing conditions. It didn't dominate a single news cycle. Go back and look at Gorsuch. It didn't dominate a single news cycle. The reason is because Barrett is on record saying she will call it unconstitutional. She created unique risk that other people didn't. And pretending that this would have happened anyway is just lying to yourself. So I would have had less problem with it if they were just embracing this risk. They're like, look, we think the getting religious conservatives really excited matters more. Or, hey, we just think she's going to be the best justice. We don't care about the politics of it. Guarantee you that wasn't Trump's mindset. But and we are willing to take. But they didn't even evaluate the risk. They didn't even assess the risk because they're still uninformed today. And then the political staging, it's one thing to have her wear a mask. Makes no sense since she's already had it, can't be spreading it at this point. But putting that aside, why pick a big, dark black mask that makes her look like a female Darth Vader? It was the worst possible imagery. I mean, it was like, oh, wow. And then, you have some of our friends in Florida and others saying, oh, I can't believe how bad this looks. This shouldn't be a surprise. Everything about her nomination was not planned well politically. It was all a sign of terrible. And just remember, folks, her little nomination gathering is probably what spread COVID. Just a random point.
Just throw it out there, And I'll tell you what, Robert, I was on a certain well-known conservative talk radio show that I got booked on from the PR agent who works for the Epoch Times. They asked me if I would do all these shows. I'm like, book whoever, liberal, conservative. The biggest problem I've had so far defending my polling, talking about my own thoughts on political strategy. The biggest one I had was a certain conservative. He's a bit of a big shot. I liked him, nice guy, but he just wasn't getting what I was talking about. And he was like, oh, she's a fantastic justice. She's so qualified. I'm like, no, stop. You're not understanding what I'm saying. You never give your political enemies a reason to bring up the one issue that drummed you, 2 years ago. And I'm sure for you, she's a great choice, but you don't represent the Trump coalition in the Rust Belt. You don't. You are
and that's what folks. I mean, it was the only thing.
No matter what.
It was the only thing Democrats ran on in 2018. Almost every House ad from mid-September on, particularly in the working class North, was just pre-existing conditions. And the other thing is I'm realizing a bunch of conservatives they're in two other denial spaces. One is they think Catholics vote like evangelical Protestants. If you just say, oh, look, we nominated a Catholic, and oh, look, they're beating up a Catholic, this will nominate. No, the Catholics are one of the lowest levels of religious observance that they've ever been in the history of the country right now. They're at half, whereas evangelical Protestants have stayed steady at going to church since the 1960s, at least once a month on average. Catholics have dropped by more than 2/3 of the number. Well, I mean, you're ex-Catholic, so
I am now Protestant.
And if you were still Catholic, you probably wouldn't be going to mass except on Easter and Christmas. I mean,
that's it. And that's all we ever did before. Right?
Exactly. They're not co-religionists the way evangelicals are. And evangelicals projected their own traits onto Catholics. It was never going to have political resonance. And what it is the problem with Trump getting COVID is it put COVID in the news. It meant it was going to be a bad news cycle for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, the Democrats did do a good job today, unfortunately, of hammering pre-existing conditions. Barrett's going to be a bad news cycle for a week because what Richard's showing you is that healthcare is surging as an issue when it shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's a problem, guys. Look, that has to be brought up. I mean, it has to be brought up. And look, I mean, do you support or oppose increasing the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, which would give the winner of the presidential election more influence over the ideological direction of the court? It's almost 2-1 there, folks. Almost 2-1 oppose. We're not talking about that, though, right now, are we? We're talking about health care. And I swear to you, Robert, about a week ago, Republicans in Pennsylvania were saying, this is going to be great because we're going to win some of the burbs back now because there's a lot of Catholics in the Philadelphia suburbs. You will see the issues in a second. They don't give a damn. Actually, we just went over the top issues. The Supreme Court nominations in low single digits. It is not having that impact because the conversation's not about that in the court. The conversation is about healthcare. Healthcare overtook coronavirus. Coronavirus was slipping behind policing, crime, and safety. Now, policing, crime, and safety is several points behind coronavirus again because it is rising. Now, yes, you can, complain about the media helping every damn debate we have. It's the first question, even though it's not the top issue, right? Yes. That's irrelevant. You stepped in it. You stepped in the minefield, and people tried to warn you, but you were vicious to us on Twitter. Vicious, right? How vicious was your damn feed, man? Oh, you were accused of anti-Catholic bigotry. Right. So this is, again, a D plus 11 electorate in this sample, regardless of how you intend to vote. And it will not be just because I keep seeing just comments on my you guys must have missed something. You haven't seen anything about the poll yet. You must have missed something. So let me give you the caveat that this is raw. And tomorrow, when the actual results are published, it will not look totally like this. But we are looking at it so we can discern what. There's definitely things we can discern out of the raw already. All right. Regardless of how you intend to vote, obviously, Trump on jobs and the economy. Look at him getting killed on healthcare. 52-3, 36. Coronavirus, 34-51. Killed. Police and crime and safety looks relatively tied, but when it's weighted properly, that will change. The Supreme Court we already played with. It goes to like 50-46 Trump. Immigration is Trump, 45-42. But look, again, it's not that many people picking these issues, right? Terrorism, national securities, like in Florida, he's got a nice lead in Pennsylvania on that. It doesn't matter. It's not a top issue. Getting killed on the environment, 27% to 54%. Race relations, 31-50. This is raw, of course. Trade negotiations, Robert, in a D plus 11 sample, they still give it to him by 7 points almost. U.S.-China relations, they still give it to him. I mean, you understand the conversation.
I mean, all the exactly. I mean, now the only upside to all of this is that the polls are going to be suppressed for Trump for all the way through October, effectively until the very end. Because
can we talk about that a little bit? How these the period themselves was not a good period to poll for Trump after coronavirus.
What tends to happen is whatever's dominating the news topics of that during that news cycle when you're polling will shape the impact of the poll and can move it 5 points in either direction. Now, it's not how I think the election is going to go. I think voters, my theory is that voters make up their mind a year in advance. It's often unconscious, but they come back to it because that's what history says. But but polling, you're monitoring temporary opinion shifts, and that tends to be focused upon whatever's transitorily in the news. And so when COVID was in the news, people thought that, I was talking to people at Rasmussen and other places, they were surprised that they were getting these big, huge pro-Biden samples.
Yeah.
I was like, look, there's nothing about COVID that Trump ever benefits from. Doesn't matter whether he survives or that COVID as a topic is bad for Trump. He got outmaneuvered early on.
Yeah.
Even though now he has a good anti-lockdown position, it wasn't as strong as it could have been because he got outmaneuvered early on. And so COVID will always be a negative for him. Healthcare always
too late.
Going back to the conservative echo chamber, apparently there's some conservatives, at least by my social media interactions, that think Obamacare is like what it was in 2010 when it was extremely controversial and slightly unpopular. Folks, it's been redefined in the past 4 years. People now hear Obamacare, they hear pre-existing conditions. They no longer hear mandate because the mandate's gone. They no longer hear the regulatory complexity, even though those that are still immersed in it are still unhappy with it. The Democrats and the media have done a good job of redefining that issue as pre-existing conditions. And so pre-existing conditions has always been protecting people from losing their health care coverage for pre-existing conditions has always been a 4-to-1 issue in the polls. They've always been in favor. It's like the minimum wage. You can be against it all you want on economic theory. Nobody, the only people that are with you are a few Mitt Romney fans and the Philly burbs. I mean, that's about it. Working class people are not with you.
And guns, just to answer the question, which, because we were talking about, people don't really change their minds that much. It goes to, if it matters that we're talking about healthcare now and pre-existing conditions, because it really is all about who you get out to vote. If people are afraid that their health insurance is going to be canceled and that their kids aren't going to get their insulin shots anymore, they're going to vote. All right. I mean, maybe they would not have before. It changes the makeup of the electorate. All right. And the issues that are strong for Trump are not the issues we're talking about right now. So look at this. Do you support or oppose defunding the police? Again, raw Kermit, it means it's the sampling raw came in at D+11. Doesn't mean the electorate is going to be D+11. So Biden's got a 6-point lead, and I can give it to you guys. Actually, it is 42 to 49 in the D+11 raw. So Democrats have a much bigger base, but 2016 was D+3. 2018 was D+5. The deal is here, it's really going to be about turnout. Trump is winning on the crossover vote. He's winning again, almost a nice chunk, almost 20% of the black vote. So that's now the second time we've confirmed that. And Biden is only taking of the Republican base, I mean, it's nothing, 8%. So, it's 14% of 45 or 43 is more than 8% of 38 or whatever it may be. So the crossover vote garners Trump more votes, but he will need to widen out the independent vote, Robert, because being tied at 39 in the raw is not good enough. So when we weight it, it's got to be more like 5 or 7, for him he's got to widen that out. I don't know what Monmouth and Nate are talking about with their independents. I just don't know. I mean, I do know they didn't reach enough, even though our raw is D+11, they didn't reach enough other independents. That's exactly what he did. And I even pulled out an email to Jerry Willis from Fox Business in 2018 about why Nate Cohn was going to be wrong in Florida. And I showed her, this is where he polled. Here's our polling now, because we did for a while have DeSantis down as well. But over time, it was clear that was starting to shrink. Here is the difference. And the exit polls weren't going to make it any better, because that's a bunch of, graduate students in urban areas trying to collect as many responses as they can. They don't go chasing down rural voters. That's just the crap. That's why exit polls are wrong. They're wrong for the same reason that media polls have been gross and wrong. So it's just a messaging failure is what we're trying to convey right here. This is horrible. Again, we have half of the electorate in the state of Pennsylvania either having not very much confidence or none at all in the integrity of this election result. And when we weight that will probably be about 53, 54%. I mean, this is just not good. What they've done to this election is not good, Robert. You can't have half the freaking electorate or more not having confidence in the outcome of this election. And we specifically state, just for all the people out there who are going to push the conspiracy crap, all we do is state what the requests are that Democrats have had in this election cycle. We want unsolicited ballots. We want unsolicited ballot requests. We want this. We want that, right? That's all we do. And we have actually, read the question. It's right there. We're actually nice about it. We didn't say they also sued to get ballot harvesters to run and collect those ballots. We could have, because they have requested it. All we did was say, if the state and local officials mail unsolicited ballot requests or ballots to everyone on the voter rolls, how much trust would you have in the integrity of the election result? People are not dumb, Robert. They understand the difference between a solicited and unsolicited ballot or request. They're not dumb, and then this sample is very, very favorable to Joe Biden. They can't even win the DC Senate question with a D+ electorate. The same thing in Florida went down. This is a couple of points, but when we weight it, the problem is there's about a third who don't know. This is another failure of messaging on the Republican part. There is about a third of the electorate in Pennsylvania who had no idea what we were talking about. that Democrats want to add 2 Senate seats in Washington D.C. They just had no idea. 46 and point change. Were comfortable or uncomfortable with Kamala Harris, very uncomfortable or somewhat uncomfortable with Kamala Harris being the president if Joe Biden can't serve out his term. We went over the 4-year question already. Here, I've been scrolling to get to this. Very, very heavily skewed towards the non-anti-fracking areas of the state, and still fracking is supported overwhelmingly. Overwhelming. This is what the Biden camp was worried about, by the way, if you remember.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, the taking the fracking position was a popular Democratic primary position, but was always going to be a problem for them in the general election, particularly in Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio and Minnesota as well. What's interesting to me is, and well, maybe that's their explanation for their theory. Going back to the early vote, it looks like there's disparate organized effort. In other words, it looks like Democrats are organizing in Minnesota, organizing in Pennsylvania, organizing in North Carolina and Florida, but are not organizing in Michigan or Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And this is something I was telling people back in 2016 on the Democratic side and other side. Folks, these states vote together. It's just, I don't care what the polling or anything else shows.
Yeah, these different disparities. These
Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are going to vote very close to each other.
Yeah.
It's only now, if there's a big anti-war difference, then sometimes there's a split there, but that's a favorable to Trump one in this context. Otherwise, if there's sometimes a specific part of the agrarian economy that's getting hit, so forth. What's fascinating to me is I think and I went back and looked at some of where Biden's been active, where they're spending the most money, et cetera. And it's consistent. I think they think Michigan and Wisconsin is in the bag.
Yeah.
And they think that Pennsylvania and Minnesota are close. And my hunch is that he thinks the only reason they're close is because of fracking and energy issues.
Yeah.
So, because I was like, how are they distinguishing in their mind that that somehow Michigan's in the bag and Wisconsin's in the bag, such that we don't even need to get out the vote campaign.
Yeah.
But that somehow Pennsylvania and Minnesota, which are on the opposite sides of that. I mean, in other words, Minnesota's usually more pro-democratic than Michigan and Wisconsin is. So why do you think Minnesota's competitive, but Michigan and Wisconsin is not? And you think Iowa and Ohio are so out of reach that you're not doing hardly any campaigning there. Apparently he's going to finally go to Ohio this week, but there's almost little money up in terms of ads, and he's got plenty of money for ads because unlike
I don't know what he's doing.
I really think their internals say Iowa and Ohio are out of reach. Michigan and Wisconsin is in the bag, and Minnesota and Pennsylvania are all that's competitive, which means they have bad internal polling of their own. And that he probably blames it on energy, because if you look at how much time he spent on this fracking issue, it's clearly what he thinks is creating risk for him. Now, that means, folks, their internal polling shows it's creating risk for him. But it's not that big of, it's a factor. It's 2 to 3 points. But like I said, if those 2 states are competitive and Iowa, Wisconsin, and Ohio are not competitive against you, then Michigan and Wisconsin are not in the bag for you. Yeah. This is just bad analysis of underlying what's taking place, but it may redound to Trump's benefit substantially. The other factor is in both the Marquette poll and the early vote, the Wisconsin, it looks like they have the WOW suburbs returning to Romney level supports for Trump.
Do they really? Yeah. See, I'm not surprised by that, Robert. Like I'm saying, we're seeing some weird stuff too, where some of these birds, like Chester, in this poll, Chester has returned to Donald Trump. It's crazy. But Biden's doing better in some of the other areas where Obama did do, better than Clinton. And that's what's doing this. And for those who were asking, I said, don't hold me to it. But when it's weighted, what I'm telling you is it's probably going to be like Biden 2, Biden maybe 3 to 4. Laura's giving me the signal 2 to 4. But, and by the way, Trump carries enthusiastic voters by extremely enthusiastic goes to Trump by 2.5 points. Very and extremely goes to Trump by 1.8. So he's got a heavier turn. That will shift, because like Robert was saying, there's just no evidence that we're going to see this jump, Robert, in new voters or younger voters. Younger voters are down to 14% in our polling right now. They were 12 and 18, but they were 16 and 16. So yeah, they look like they're going to be right about in the middle,
Yeah,
right in the middle.
And that's where I think voter registration data is useful. So we're getting inconsistent information out of the suburbs. You have prediction, and not only that, the New York Times polls today were also contradictory. So they were showing college-educated Michigan voters being dead even, but in Wisconsin, them heavily favoring Biden. Marquette showing totally the opposite in Wisconsin. Early Vote says the opposite in Wisconsin. So the voter files say the opposite in Wisconsin. So when you're seeing these internal contradictions of extreme, 30 to 40 point gaps, 20 point gaps, that means they never didn't get a good representative sample in the first place. And what it is they're looking at, does their overall sample match certain demographics, rather than did they get a good representative sample of a sub-constituency?
Yeah, that's what it's breaking down to, I think, Robert. I do.
Yep. Now, as a whole, my view, the reason why I look at other data points, historical metrics, and then voter registration data and things of that nature, is because my own view has always been that a poll should be a secondary data point. And the reason for that is we're asking people to predict what they are going to do in the future. And in my experience, people are bad at that across the board. So you tend to capture transitory moments. That's why news cycles can heavily influence temporary polling. It goes to Nassim Taleb's theory about Nate Silver's model. And to give basic in statistics, there's a theory that if you have too much variability in your price estimate of something occurring, then you fail to properly price that something that causes that variability to even occur.
Can I bring something up real quick? Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought. I don't want to.
Oh yeah, just so Taleb's point was, if you have variability of great, like one day it's 65%, next day it's 35%, things like that, then he says what you really have is you should just assume 50% because you're failing to price something that led you to overvalue something or undervalue it previously. And right. It's a theory that all traders understand very well. So your quants really understand it. He even wrote papers about it. And Nate Silver tried to argue with him and then backed off because Nate Silver's nowhere in Taleb's school.
Ballpark. No, he's not. I read that paper by that Taleb wrote. I read that and it was interesting stuff. I will tell you this, guys. He got caught again over the weekend. The ABC tracker came out. It was plus 12. And then he shifted his model to like 8% now, or something. Did he or did he not just argue in response to criticism from us and others like us that he is using national polling to project state level poll? And then he said national polls actually don't have that much impact on our model. This is why, again, it's like every time we have this show, there's something that he's caught doing that supports what I've told you all from the jump. The man is a fraud. He doesn't have a model. It is a poll reading operation. You're no better or worse at it than he is. He just plugs some damn number on it, guys. There are no simulations, all right? There's no machine in the Nate Silver bat cave where they're going, all right, now let's run another simulation. And then like this screen comes up and starts ticking off 1,000 different simulations. That's bullcrap, all right? It's not happening. He just said that national polling does not impact it. Then why on earth did all of this, the CNN, NBC News poll, and ABC polls all national? Because the state level polling, with the exception of the New York Times, got better for Donald Trump in that period. Texas is off the table now. The Texas Tribune poll was 45-42, the final in 2016. It is now 50-45. So Trump being at 50, Biden being trailing by 5 points, a little bit bigger than it was in 2016, even though some others like Emerson did give Trump a big advantage in Texas. Arizona, you see, he hates Trafalgar, Nate. He hates Trafalgar. So he just ignored the +4 for Trump in Arizona. And the picture was on Friday was becoming pretty clear. And I think I even messaged you, the must-win states look pretty. Oh, and then the Orlando Fox 5 pollster was like, we got Trump up by 3, right? So it looked like the must-win states were going toward Trump on Friday. So what changed, Nate? The only thing that changed for Biden was the national polls, which you just freaking claimed don't have much impact at all on your model. It's a fraud, man. I just had to get that off my chest just to point out when it happens, you know?
And the problem with all of those models, aside from the inherent variability, which proves they're failing to predict something with a high degree of accuracy, they're failing to account for something, or they shouldn't have that degree of variability, according to Gallup and statistical theory, and the quants that do a lot of algorithmic trading on Wall Street. The independent of that, part of what creates that is over dependence on the top line of polls of select, and within that select, he's not even a good poll reader. In other words, he favors certain polls over others without a scientific or evidentiary basis for that. He often doesn't know how to look at internal data. He doesn't know how to look at subgroup demographics to see which way they're trending, and he ignores key information. So as a general question, a polling question that has been predictive, more predictive than the top line, has been, there's three questions that one's been predictive of turnout, the other two have been predictive of outcome. Predictive of turnout is that for a long time, Gallup has asked people, are they paying very close attention?
Yes. Yeah.
So and that has corresponded to turnout increase or decrease with great consistency. I monitored it in other polls as well, but Gallup is great because they have a big baseline.
Decades. Yeah.
Gallup shows it went from 39% to 43%. So they have a 10% increase in those that are very closely paying attention to the election. What's more interesting to me was the internals of the Gallup poll. So generally speaking, the internals have accurately forecast the racial and age, particularly the age gap in turnout. So in other words, if there's a 35-point gap between seniors and young people in who's paying very close attention to the election, that same gap tends to show up in the actual turnout, the presidential election numbers, by what the census puts out, about a year later after the election.
Right.
By that data point, the gap is as big as it's ever been. So this is a sign that not only is they're showing the same level of interest as 2008, effectively, not much different than 2016. And most of the increased interest is not coming from groups that can increase their voter share. Like I said, seniors just don't increase their voter share. In fact, the only people that are most interested are working class whites that are middle-aged, between the ages of 35 and 60. That's where you're seeing spikes of interest and where you could get some voter share increase. The young vote the gap of the young vote is over 33 points. That historically has meant that young voters are going to have a historic low, like probably the lowest level since 2000 in their share of the electorate.
Yeah. They're going to be lower, Robert. I mean, right now, and I don't know what I'm going to do about this, but just applying, because while you're talking, I'm working, and
I'm going to grab a cup of coffee real quick. I'll be right back.
All right. Yeah. Here, just to tell people, as Robert's talking, I'm waiting, and just to give somebody had asked a question before. No, the raw was D11 and Biden had about just under a 7-point lead with D11. But that just simply means we reached certain people at greater rates, right? So if basically when we start to apply some of the magic juju, right? The likely voter and region is weighted correctly. All right, then it's going to change. And right now it did, in fact, and I'm not done applying variables, but it looks a lot like 2016. So Democrats dropped from 44% to 42%. Republicans rose from 35 to almost 39. Independents actually fell to 19%. And folks, if you guys have been watching the voter file stuff, you know what I'm talking about. Independents are not a huge share of the electorate in Pennsylvania. Men, and Robert was just about to get into this, men are typically, it's a 47-53 or 48-52. In 2018, it was actually even closer. And this time around, it looks like that the gender breakdown in Pennsylvania is going to be 49-51. And people don't think that's possible. It just happened in 2018. And what I'm telling you is men are more likely to vote. They are telling us they are more likely to vote. So when we're we're applying these weights for region, it actually took, and what Robert was just saying, raw came in at 14% from the age of 18 to 29, 14 and change. when we start to apply region and whatnot, maybe they're overrepresented in a certain area, which I can see clear as day they are. They could fall as low as 13% here, which is down from
even 12%.
I was just going to say they fell to 12 and 18, Robert. It's possible. And we're coming up right now with 13.5.
And if you look at you look at voter share and Catalyst voter file had lower numbers of youth participation than the exit polls did. And when you add to that, and the census kind of did as well. Also, when they've done studies, they find that young people overreport, including in the census, their share of the electorate. The very close attention that has been highly predictive, and it was one of those polls that you should watch, but Nate Silver pays zero attention to. This is what I mean by he's not even good as being a poll reader. He only reads the top line, which is not the line to read. No. And he doesn't monitor subsample, doesn't even know what subsamples to look for. He wouldn't know to even think about Norwegian voter groups. So if you asked him, where do you think Norwegians are going to go and how it's going to impact me? No idea. He would have zero idea. He would have zero idea of their historical significance and consequence. So that's problem one. Problem two is there have been good polling indicators. And the three questions, one is who's paying very close attention, particularly with low turnout propensity demographic groups. Like, I don't really, this was the mistake Republicans made in 2012. They paid attention to the partisan gap.
Yeah.
And the problem was that I don't care whether your post-college educated Republican is paying 30 points more attention than your post-college educated Democrat, because they both always vote.
That's right.
I care about whether your African-American millennial minority is paying very close attention than, say, your working class rural Republican, like was happening in 2012, by the way.
It's getting very close as this is doing its thing, by the way. 47-44 currently. And it could widen a little bit, but that's what I'm trying to tell you. Well, and by the way, we didn't even talk about this, Robert. Leaners. Leaners are going for Trump when we lean them, because now it's time. It's time to ask, all right, guys, cut the crap. It's October 8th, 9th, 10th, right? Where we are now. It's time to choose something. Are you leaning one way or the other? It's October 11th yesterday, right? Are you leaning one way or the other? And Trump would pick up on net about 3 points. So this is the second state now where I don't know what this is yet, though. And see, I'm probably the only pollster who will say that out loud, those three words. I don't know, because everyone wants to pretend like it's a gospel, right? The truth is, I don't know if I'm picking up social bias or these people really are like late bloomers and late deciders, because this happened to me in Michigan and happened to me in Wisconsin, happened to me in Pennsylvania in 2016. Folks, if this does bear out to be Biden +3, we were the only ones, or one of the few, to show that Pennsylvania and these Rust Belts were competitive. But it didn't go to Clinton +3 until October 24th. And it may have even been Clinton +4. She was constantly ahead, 6 points, 7 points, because of the way this stuff just pans out. But I will say this, he won't get over the finish line, even if things start to move his way, if he doesn't widen out that independent vote. But I don't know if I'm picking up on biases or what you were just talking about, where, the difference between a Bill Kristol Republican and an average watcher of what are the odds, right? I mean, there's a big difference. Look at number 23, and this is, and 23 and 24 are about the shy vote, or potentially whether or not people are comfortable. This is worse than Florida. And we found some big numbers in Florida. This is significantly worse than Florida. Why? Because they have a pretentious burb like the Philly burbs, right? Where Florida doesn't have, or not to that degree. And no offense to Pennsylvania, I'm just saying it's not like a barista culture, right?
No, you're more exposed to risk of, and the reality of in Florida is people are pretty much open about their politics across the board, much more so than they would. There's very few Republicans in hostile Democratic jurisdictions, maybe parts of Broward, but even Miami-Dade, you have big, loud Republican minority constituencies like the Cubans and the Venezuelans. You don't have that in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the institutional media is very hostile. The Philadelphia suburbs are very hostile. The city of Philadelphia is very hostile. So you have a sort of elite Democratic groups, and those are the ones driving the suppression of people's willingness to express their will. And by the way, one technique for everybody out there, before I get back to the Gallup, important Gallup poll questions, is that you're seeing comparisons between the post 2020 polls and the current polling.
Yeah.
And that's highly misleading. The relevant comparison is like for ABC's poll that they just did, plus 12, compare it to the 2016 poll. Instead, that's not what ABC is doing. They're comparing it to the post-election poll, pretending that their 2016 poll wasn't making the exact same mistake as this one, and instead trying to create a fake narrative that says, oh, Trump is down among seniors, Trump is down amongst working class whites, Trump is down among... No, the polls in 2016 constantly underestimated Trump's share amongst working class whites.
Yes.
So I looked at the Pew data in detail. Compared to their 2016 poll, Trump is doing better with working class whites. I compared a whole, but there's this myth out there that Trump is doing worse amongst working class whites. Nate Silver actually believes it. Nate Cohn actually believes it. But it's amazing that they're comparing the wrong thing. Scott Adams is fond of saying that most bad data analysis is the product of people who don't know how to compare the right things. Well, that's the case in polling in particular. Are they comparing the same pollster using the same method at this time that they polled before? Or are they comparing it to exit polls? Are they comparing it to their post-election validated polls? That's not a relevant barometer because they never captured those voters in 2016. There's no reason to believe they're suddenly capturing them in 2020. There's a myth.
They didn't get him in 18 either.
No, there's a great myth out there that they only made a mistake on education, that they've corrected that.
That's right. That's right.
It's a myth. They didn't get it right. Here, what they missed in 2016 wasn't a lack of working class whites in their polls. It was which working class whites they weren't getting to. Yeah. So to give you an example, Pew, why did they have Hillary plus 7, ended up being Hillary plus 2? Almost all of that 5-point gap, according to their own post-election validated voter file poll of over 30,000 people, was entirely working class white, especially working class white men. They missed the working class white male vote for his margin by 20 points in 2016. And they're doing this, should have been a sign to them. When that same group was suddenly trending towards Biden in 2020 in their new poll, that should have told them you're missing the vote again. Yep. Not that it has suddenly shifted. It's that you're missing the vote again. Signs for Nate Cohn. He put out these dots of where he got voters to change, voters reporting shifting from Trump to Biden. And you look at almost all of those Midwestern maps, he has almost nothing net positive towards Biden in rural areas. So it should have told, okay, why is he oversampled? Why is it the only people shifting their votes are in urban areas? Yeah. Maybe that there is rural voters trending Republican. Maybe he doesn't know how to look at the demographics. He also didn't recognize, what I paid attention to that map was, okay, I wonder in all of Norwegian Minnesota, in all of Norwegian Wisconsin, and in the parts of Iowa that have heavy Norwegian populations, are any of those groups trending Biden? In fact, what his little dots picked up was that they're trending Trump, even more so than 2016. That tells me Norwegian voters are they're going to be missed in the polls. Trump's going to overperform Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin again. But that's what's missing out there is is comparison to apples, oranges to oranges. Like
I said yesterday on Twitter, I said, and they want to go back decades and decades and do this, and it's like, you cannot compare. It's not even an apples to oranges comparison. Like we're talking about the old days of the gold standard, good old accurate Gallup and time to maybe a miss here and there, but because the media polls were never good. In truth, they were never good. And Gallup always beat out the media polls. They showed horse races and Gallup would always be like, shut the hell up, right? And that's the way it was.
To give just a brief history, which we've done before, but basically we went from live in-person polling from 1936 to 1968, for at least by Gallup. Other people polled by other methods, but that was the main method. Then from 1968 to 2004, landline phone polling. And the way they would poll is here's all the advantages to landline phone polling. Still wasn't quite as good as in-person polling, but the advantage to landline phone polling was you knew the person lived in that district because they couldn't literally answer the phone unless they lived within that district.
That's right.
Number two, you knew you were getting that whole household. So you would usually ask for the youngest person in the household because they would oversample older people typically by that method in terms of who answered it. But that allowed you to make sure you got a good cross samples of an individual household. You knew you weren't polling that household, say, 5 times. And third, back then you were getting good response rates. To give people an idea, half the people or more would answer a poll between 1968 and 2000.
Yeah.
That response rate creates random sampling that is the scientific part of polling. The rest is art. The rest is art where you're trying to, okay, I know this demographic. I'm going to try to get a good sample of that sub-demographic. That's the artist part. And what I like to say is polling went from being half science, half art to all art, and all the media's artists are bad at it. And so they're getting knockoffs rather than the real deal. Starting in 2000 and accelerating through 2004, 2008, 2 things happened. People stopped using landlines and going to cell phones, number one. Number two, people stopped responding. In addition, especially with cell phones, they were put on do not call list because those phones were abused by marketers. And so for some people, you can't even reach them. And so there's a whole group of people that are never polled unless they're online and respond to online polls. And then you had the beginning of online polling in 2008 forward. As Pew explained, the second, so first is the mode just changed. Second is who responded, and
answers to that mode. Yep.
Radically changed. We went from 50% response rates to today, the average response rate is 2%. That means 98% of the people who are polled refuse to even answer the poll. This removes random sampling from even the equation. Pew started pointing this out in 2006. That's why they basically previewed they were going to move to an online sample mechanism that doesn't have random sampling, because they said, look, you don't have random sampling anyway. Once you get to such a low rate, you have a problem with what's the likelihood that the 2% of people who respond to the poll are representative of the 98% that don't. Yeah. And you get into non-response bias, and that's why variability comes into the equation. That's where.
Yet they keep using the same terms, Robert. Margin of error, you're not, and there are, just to answer some people in the queue, there are scientific ways to poll online. There absolutely are. All right. Unless you're talking about like a Drudge poll where he puts a poll up on his website or something, that is not a scientific poll, or Twitter. That is not a scientific poll. Okay. But there are ways to poll scientifically online. That's why we always release the checklist, guys. You want to see the math formulas? Knock yourself out if you like crazy math. Because there are. But the problem is what Robert is saying, removing randomization. You can't then continue to use, and Mark Murray did this at SurveyMonkey in 2016 constantly. I get a margin of error of this. You have a margin of nothing. You have there's no such way to calculate a margin of error for an online opt-in sample. What are you talking about? It's a sampling error, a confidence interval, like that, which is what you'll see in the USC poll, guys. That is a confidence interval. They are confident it will end one of the twos, both of those vote shares will end up somewhere in that gray bar. That's all they can tell you. That's it. And it may be that one's a little bit lower than the other. One, maybe their red line is below their blue line, but it may end up that the red line is above the blue line and the blue line's below, but they'll be in the gray. That's what a confidence interval means in layman's terms. All right. Just to give people that idea.
And for folks out there, polling has become much, much, much more difficult.
Yeah,
it is. Even though there was, even all the way when polling was at the gold standard, in person, live phone calls, talking to average Gallup sample was over 3,000 people. I mean, that was the kind of sampling that they were doing because they understood the importance of separate subgroups. Even their polls would have an average error of an average poll in a presidential election of 5 points. And at least a poll would be off by double digits in almost every presidential election that even the gold standard was polling. So that gives you an idea that polling's always been a difficult predictive tool from the first place, because in large part, people are bad at telling you what they're actually going to do. And there's about 20% of the people that either lie to you or often don't know themselves. And now there's reasons. The reason why I use other data points is because it tells you what they're really going to do. Don't listen to what somebody says. Pay attention to their behavior. Now, listen to what they say in Gallup in 3 areas. If they say they're paying very close attention by demographic, that's a good predictor of turnout. That's pointing to a very Trump-friendly turnout in 2020. Number two, if they say they feel economically they are better off than they were 4 years ago,
Yes,
that
yeah.
is every single time more has said yes than no, the incumbent has won every single time, regardless
absolutely
of what the polls show. So in 2012, at times Romney was ahead. In 2004, at times Kerry was ahead. In fact, some polls he was always ahead.
He was always ahead. That's how John Zogby lost his reputation. It wasn't being for pro-Bush. It was being pro-Kerry.
Precisely. In
Three
1992, when Pat Buchanan first challenged Poppy Bush looked to be a lock.
Yeah.
He was at 90% approval a few months before at the peak of the Iraqi war. But if you looked at the 4-year better off or worse off question, Poppy Bush was a dead loser. Jimmy Carter was ahead again. Contrary to what they're telling you, Jimmy Carter was ahead because I have
absolutely.
He was ahead in Reagan on average by double digits throughout all of 1980. But if you paid attention to the 4-year question, you saw that Carter was likely to lose according to that question. So similar in 1976, it showed it was going to be a closer race than expected and it was. They were predicting Carter big, ended up being just a 2-point election. And so you could say they didn't have the question, but my guess is how it would be answered in 1948 would have told you Truman was going to win when the polls were saying the opposite.
Yeah.
By the way, the average Dewey lead was 9 points. You're getting some people out there that have these fake news information. There's one guy who was educating me about how smart he was and how smart he was than anyone else, and he was telling me that Dewey was never ahead by more than 5. No, the last poll he was up by 13.
I was just going to say even Gallup.
Gallup had him up by double digits most of the way.
I have it right here. I wrote about that twice already. I mean, because of people constantly, I'm like, all right, let's go.
Because the hearing ends of the world lie about the past, lie about the history. That's where their lying comes in. The selective memory, selective rendition.
And 18, Robert, they're doing it now. In 2018, you just said it. This is a myth that they have corrected for education, and that was all the problem, and everything's fine.
Class white men. They're just not. I mean, look at what Richard's going to be in the field over a week using a range of modes, going right to voter files, and it's still hard to reach that voter group.
Yep. And by the way, just to give people, because I see the conversations, I want to keep people in the loop. I mean, it's being worked on now as we speak. And I'm just like, I feel like I'm watching an election day thing here because it just keeps getting closer and closer. Because what we identified is that after it was region is, again, just talking about it right now, they are pretending and acting like everything was about education and that's it. It's education and region where there are two major problems. And then reaching certain groups of people in those regions.
Kind of voter. I mean, I describe it as a 50-year-old small town plumber.
Yeah.
Right? That voter has started to refuse to answer polls at a I mean, here's the problem. In the past, you could at least get 2% of a particular group to respond. The problem is many polls now are getting 0% of certain.
Yeah, that's so true. And guys, he's not lying. When he's saying 0, he means 0. That's how you get, by the way, you're missing completely more working class black men in Florida. So you come up with the Suffolk poll, which was tied at 47-47. Trump's at 60% almost with whites, at 42% with Hispanics. Biden's got a 3-point lead with Hispanics, yet Biden's only at 80 with black voters and Trump is at 3 or 4%. That's not going to happen. He's going to win at least 8 to 12% of the black vote in Florida. You missed the rural working man, and that's a black man. And by the way, just to give people a real quick update, because Philadelphia was grossly overrepresented, Philadelphia alone in that Biden +7 was 18.8% alone in this sample. So it's not, folks. It'll be maybe 12, 13%, 14%. It will not in a presidential election year be 20% of the vote in Philadelphia. That's not, I mean, in Pennsylvania, totally. That's not going to happen. What was it? You got the numbers there?
Well, yeah, that's what I said. That's a good bridge into voter registration data. Okay. So I use voter registration data for two different.
Much closer, Robert. Much closer now.
If you look at voter registration, I look at it first, but 4-year comparisons to look at what has changed in key swing states and certain key sub-constituencies. The second thing I do is I look at voter registration data within 6 months of the election, between April to October. And the first voter registration file tells me how certain groups are moving in their partisan alignment. And I'll explain why I believe it to be predictive of presidential elections in a second. The second group tells me turnout trends and turnout tendencies. So if you see a particular group dominating or a particular group underperforming, then it has been a guaranteed predictor ever since this data has been gathered and available to me of what would happen with turnout. And I'll give you some real life examples of this, but as a quick bridge, it predicts that Philadelphia is going to have unusually low turnout in 2020.
Oh, okay.
So that voter
makes me feel a little bit better, buddy, because it looks that way.
Smaller share of the vote. In particular, the early vote data is also confirming that. In other words, the only way they could counter all of this Gallup saying very low interest, the primary presidential participation rate saying very low interest. Remember, the youth vote was down within the Democratic primaries from 2016 to 2020. That Bernie lost young voters that he got in 2016 who did not show up in 2020. That was one of the ongoing discussions about Bernie's campaign in 2020. But I don't think it was Bernie's fault. It was underlying dynamics. And then additionally, what we're seeing with voter registration data, to give an example, in Nevada, the youth vote is a bigger share of the population in Nevada over the last 4 years, but its share of the overall registered voters has gone down 10%. And that's consistent with what Richard's finding in extreme enthusiasm. And where else it shows up in voter registration, or wherever I can get age data, the young vote is if young people are really going to massively turn out, this huge non-voter group that New York Times' entire poll is based on.
What the hell are they? That's right.
It is on that. If that's going to happen, my historic view is they're going to vote in the presidential primaries. That's number one. If they don't vote then, they're not really that interested. But number two, they have to at least register, because they ain't voting if they ain't registering. Now, I know some have same-day registration, so we'll have to wait and watch. But again, these voters, and I looked into the New York Times polls and other polls over the weekend, and they are reporting that young voters are self-reporting that they're going to vote early, particularly the Democratic ones, at a disproportionate rate. Well, folks, they're at a below-average rate currently. They are at a very low percentage. You're talking 3 to 4% of the early in states that have more than 10% of the vote already voting. So my only worry was maybe their organizational effort will get young people who otherwise wouldn't vote to vote because they get unsolicited ballots in the mail and they get knocks on the door, have you send it in, and things of that. That's not happening. There's no evidence of it so far, even weeks into various early voting where some states have voted in big numbers. And it's consistent across the board. Doesn't matter what state it is, the youth vote is down, not up, down. So that's one of the things I look for voter registration. But the second, to give you an idea of how predictive it is, if any state has trended for a particular party by a decent number between presidential elections, then it has predicted that party will do better than it did in the prior presidential election every single time. So there is no example historically of, say, Republicans gaining in Florida between presidential elections and voter registration and getting a smaller share of the vote. Now, it hasn't always been a sign that they'll win. This was sometimes a mistake that was made in 2012. But it was closer. It was a lot closer in Florida than it was in 2008.
Damn right.
In every context, whichever party, so between 2000 and 2004, Republicans gained substantially in Pennsylvania and Florida. Guess what? George W. Bush ran better in both states. Between 2004 and 2008, the North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Florida all trended Democratic in voter registration. Obama did much better in all three states, to the point he actually stole North Carolina. In 2012, all three states in voter registration trended Republican between 2008 and 2012. Romney did better than McCain in all three states.
Yeah, this is interesting stuff. And
now,
go ahead.
In 2016, it trended Republican in Pennsylvania, it trended Republican in North Carolina, trended Republican in Florida, and Trump did better in all three states. So there is no historical example of a voter registration trending Republican in a state, and that state getting less Republican in the presidential election. And to give you an idea, the scale of the jump in those three states in partisan registration for Republicans is off the charts in 2020. So, for example, in Florida, but
enormous. Go ahead.
So yeah, in Florida, the move, the Republican move just and actually the date has now been updated, but Republicans are now, you actually predicted that you thought it'd be get under 135,000 Democratic advantage, and over the weekend that's what it got to. The smallest advantage by far, and one of the biggest pro-Republican movements between presidential elections in the history of Florida. I mean, to give you an example, in 2004, Bush did great, even though the Democrats gained 50,000. Well, this is the eve of the election, 50,000 votes because of how close it was. In other words, he made major improvements at shrinking the Democratic edge in the state. Trump has gained more. And now, in all the states, he's gained 2 points in Pennsylvania, 4 points in North Carolina. This is anywhere from 2 to 5 times greater the advantage that he had between 2012 and 2016.
No Democratic presidential candidate has ever carried the state of Florida with less than 580,000 voter registration advantage. That would be Barack Obama, who did it with 65,000 vote margin. That's it.
Say the same about North Carolina, that the gap is the smallest gap it's been in North Carolina in recorded registration history. It's the smallest gap in Florida that it's been in registration history. It's the smallest gap in Pennsylvania that it's been in voter registration history. To put it a different way, Republicans are doing better in those 3 states than they have ever done, and this factor has been more predictive than polls consistently. So even when polls were back and forth in 2004 in Florida, the voter registration said Republicans were going to do better than they did in 2000. Their registration numbers were more accurate than the polls. Same thing in 2008, same thing in 2012, same thing in 2016. Now let's go to the second set of polling data I use, which is what's been happening in the 6 months prior to election. Because my view is when you see, do you see really, and I look particularly at certain demographic groups, do groups that are otherwise low turnout groups, are they showing unusual levels of either low or high voter registration? So to give you an example, in Florida, the Democratic gap in 2004 was one of the smallest it had been in the 6 months leading up to the election. It was only 47,000 for the Democrats. It was a sign that Republicans had more enthusiasm than they historically had. If you go to 2012, by contrast, Democrats registered 275,000 new voters, or voters that shifted registrations, in the 6 months leading up to the election. Republicans only 150,000, which was less than half of the number they had done in 2004, 8 years before, even though the population had increased. So what you saw was and in particular, if you looked at within those demographics, you saw unusually high African-American voter registration in 2012 and unusually low rural Republican, working class Republican area registration in 2012. It was a sign that Romney's people had below average enthusiasm and Obama's core constituencies above average enthusiasm, which is, of course, also what the polls were showing in who was paying very close attention, who participated in the presidential primaries, who said that they were going to be extremely enthused about voting in the election, confirmed by voter registration data, by actual behavior. 2016, Trump, 200,000 new Republican registrants, 275,000 Democratic registrants. It was a much smaller edge. So Trump showed that he had brought back that missing vote from 2004 and 2008, that rural working class Republican, back into the fold. Now, here's what's shocking of 2020. In 2020, Trump is on pace to register again more than 200,000 new voters, or voters shifting to the Republican registration list in Florida. Democrats are at a historic low of around 80,000 in that 6 month time frame. So in the post-primary pre-presidential election time period. So it looks like Democrats will have the lowest level of new voter registrations or voter registrations in their favor than they've ever had, and a number that's going to be less than half of what they had in just 2016. So this is showing this is below even Romney levels of 2012, levels of interest and enthusiasm. The exact same, like in North Carolina, you had in 2004, you had only a tiny Democratic edge in new registrations. In 2012, this gives you an idea. In 2008, that was very good, but in 2012, new Democratic registrants in the last 6 months prior to the election, Democrats outnumbered Republicans 170,000 to 50,000. And to give you an idea, W registered 161,000 new registrants in the 6 months leading to election in 2004. That dropped off by almost 75% in 2012. So it was a sign that there was great excitement amongst Obama's otherwise low turnout base and extreme disappointment amongst Romney, the working class Republican vote. So again, it forecast where the enthusiasm was. It forecast what the electorate was going to look like because of turnout tendencies. In 2016, that number was almost dead even. So again, it was all Trump did in 2016 was bring back your historic working class rural vote that had missed or skipped 2012. He didn't really add new voters. And this is what even Dave Wasserman admitted.
And they just weren't their previous couple elections. They weren't totally new, folks. They just hadn't voted in years.
Correct. And what Wasserman admitted is that if you look at the voter file, Trump has tons of growth amongst working class whites across the country. Because in 2016, while he brought them back, people that had voted in 04, 08, he brought back, he still didn't get people that had just been skipping out. And now if he gets that kind of new voter, then that can and the greatest growth room is there. That's the greatest growth space of any voter group out there is working class blue collar voters, that particularly non-Hispanic whites, but across the board. Because by the way, Trump is doing better amongst high school educated whites.
He is. Yep.
African Americans, high school educated Latinos. Even Pew admits this.
Look at the difference in enthusiasm, Robert, by party alone. Look at that extremely enthusiastic Democrats, and I really need to make this one decimal point, but Democrats 54.6 or 0.7 if we round up, compared to Republicans 65.2. I mean, it's a big enthusiasm gap.
And even the New York
Times, same thing.
And even New York Times had an admission of a partisan gap in who is certain to vote by 7 to 10 points in Wisconsin and Michigan favoring Republicans, by the way.
And here we have men again. Yeah, see, that even they found it, right? And they're just not applying that to part of their equation, Robert. That doesn't, and even if they did, let's say they are, it can't overwhelm them with those projection, the electorate projections. Trump will never do well in their polls if they continue to project this kind of an electorate with no evidence that it's going to happen. Because here we have again men more enthusiastic by age. A little bit funny here, but you can see 18 to 29, only 43% are extremely enthusiastic. 49% ages 30 to 44 are extremely enthusiastic compared to 45 to 64, Trump's best category actually in Pennsylvania, ironically. And that is 58%. And then seniors, 67.5%. All right. It's not done yet, so don't go getting everybody in a tizzy, but I will show you the entire so far anyway. Now that region is done. And there could be some that swings it back towards Biden a little bit, but no shocker here. We're going to find a much, much closer race here, Robert. All right. Things aren't done. Crossover votes a little bit better for Trump. That'll change once age goes over again. But clearly we're looking at a 46.9 to 44.6 race. So when that is done, it's not totally done yet, but again, we'll go out and get about 150 more. In Florida last time that happened, that helped Trump. I'm not sure that it will. We'll just have to follow and see, but it's getting much closer because Philadelphia is not 20% of the damn vote. All right. And that's where it was coming down. Weird thing too, looking at counties, Robert, again, Chester, Trump has about a 2-point lead. Somebody asked me about a county. Guys, what was that before? Somebody asked me about a specific county. If I missed you, I got you, Philadelphia. Somebody asked about something. That was an interesting question. So I might have missed that. Shoot it again. Center. Okay, yes. Center was very close last time, about 2 points. Center County right now. Let me grab by counties more specifically. In which county do you live? Okay. Center should be one of the first ones too. It's in alphabetical order. But for instance, Biden's doing better in Berks or something like that. So Trump is right on his heels, 3 points in center, about the same amount as it was before. And again, not huge samples, but center is like too much for central Pennsylvania. And that's why if you just look at central Pennsylvania, it doesn't look that much. But Biden is doing better in some areas in Dutch, and that's Berks is considered the Dutch area. So something like that would skew that area, and I can understand. He's doing better in Bucks, But like Robert and I spoke about before, we probably got a little bit too much of a liberal sample in Bucks. That is highlighted by the Italian vote being too liberal. So that's a little bit of a red flag right there. Again, folks, Hillary Clinton. Oh my God, I got to show you this. Hillary Clinton won the Philadelphia suburbs, guys, by 14 or 13 points in 2016. All right. But that wasn't the overall burb vote. Overall in the burbs, Trump carried it 52-44. We have, Robert, right now, it's a 2-point suburban race, and I mean 2 points in favor of Trump. All right. It's just that he's doing a little bit worse in rural areas. Again, that may be a polling artifact. Maybe he does better. And that's the difference. But it's hurting Joe Biden in our polling that he's not doing as well as Hillary Clinton. And I think that's just, it may be turnout, Robert. It may be that Trump's people in that area are going to go out, but his may not.
Part of it, I mean, that's where I use voter registration data to sort of correlate in terms of voter registration trends, both in terms of over the whole 4-year cycle and in the last 6 months. The data in Pennsylvania is that what you've had happen is in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, particularly just not Bucks, but the other 3 counties, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware, Democrats have net added 100,000 registrants to the net Democratic Party edge in just the last 6 months. In the rest of the state, the net Democratic gain is 0, and the net Republican addition is over 300,000. So what you're seeing is a massive shift in the entire state. Outside of Philadelphia, the 3 suburban counties, and Philadelphia has been even, Bucks has been even, the 3 affluent suburban counties heavily trending Democratic, the whole Allegheny even, the whole rest of the state trending Republican in voter registration by double digits. So Trump
is 56-35, and when you add, like I said, those undecideds, it could be a little bit better for him.
I have no doubt. Trump, because of turnout and because of shifting votes, is going to run 5 to 10 points better in rural in the whole rest of the state outside of the suburbs. And Philly and Pittsburgh are going to be down as a share of the vote. So I think Biden will run 10 points ahead in the affluent suburban parts of Chester, Montgomery, and Delaware.
Yeah,
Chester has a rural part. And then I think it'll end up being about the same in Bucks.
Erie is tied now with some of the. Remember we spoke about Erie earlier before the show. It's tied now, and that's of course some of that is other stuff that comes in. Some of that is waiting. Of course, I mean, look, Erie's not 70% female, so the so the waiting variable for gender.
Erie's a place that's heavily. Exactly. Erie is a place that's heavily trending, voter registration-wise, Republican. I mean, my favorite example
is undecided, Robert. I mean, let's be real. Are they really 14% undecided in Erie, or are they just full of crap and they're not telling us?
Right. It's some dynamic like that. But if you look at, say, Trump has added Johnstown to his tour this week, his rally tour. And Johnstown is in Cambria County. And an example of where Nate Cohn should have known his data was off is he got too many Democrats out of Johnstown and missed the rest of Cambria County.
Yeah.
And he has it trending Democratic. Well, folks, in voter registration earlier this year just in April, Cambria County, like it had historically, leaned 20 points Democratic in voter registration.
Yeah.
Today, it has more registered Republicans than Democrats in that county. It is the Politico did a huge story on Cambria County.
Yeah.
Dear Calizza.
It's hard. It's hard to call, though, Cambria, Robert. Very. What did he get? Like 10 responses out of Cambria? How is he going to discern how there's a swing? I mean, really, what was his?
Somebody monitoring it, it's a Pennsylvania data nerd, said, by the way, he said, all your Cambria County data is in Johnstown. He said, you're getting Democratic. You didn't get any of the area around it, which is half the vote in the county.
We did too, and it's still tied. It's still tied. I'm not kidding.
That county is going to vote heavy Trump.
It's tied. Cambria with it very, very well. Trump's up a point, and it's heavily skewed to that area. We plotted it on the map with high charts, and on because it gives you a better example, like down to the. We'll do that tomorrow probably on Inside the Numbers, and I'll tweet it out so people can see. But we did it like Nate does it, where there's littler dots everywhere, and as opposed to the bubbles that give you the shares. And it was, that was one area where I was disappointed. And then looking at the damn central part of the state, how much was coming out of Center County, you know, I'm like, you know, so
it's just that's your area, your downscale industrial area and your rural small town area where particularly working class men are just not answering polls.
Yeah.
So that's where I look at now. The one for me, polling is always a secondary data point. To give the overarching view, Helmut Norpoth's model, which is basically the same as I had my betting model before Norpoth had his. Professor Norpoth out of State University of New York at Stony Brook. It's called the primary model. I have a slight variation on it that's different, but he ended up copying the model or using the same model. And his model is that you look at presidential primary participation rates. Is the incumbent party united or divided? And he uses how excited and enthused is the opposition party about their candidate, and vote share in early states. And using just those metrics, his data has disagreed with polling data in 4 elections. His model predicted a different outcome. Now, this is retroactively, but his model predicted a different outcome in 1948 than
that's kind of the point, though, at modeling, to be retroactive, to make sure you would have been right. So you weren't around, right?
Meant to be retroactively validated. But so he looked at this and said, okay, does this model better predict past elections and then future elections than do polls? And so the only time where there was a big gap was 1948. There was a big gap between his model and what polls were showing. The next time there was a big gap was 1980. The next time there was a big gap was 2004. And the next time there was there's been 5. The next time there was a gap was 2012 in terms of polls showing it very competitive, his model saying it wasn't. And in 2016. So he's had 5 times where polls were saying one thing, the model was saying something else. The model's been right all 5 times, and the polls have been wrong all 5 times. The same is true of voter registration trends. The same is true of voter registration enthusiasm. And to finish up that point quickly, on enthusiasm, to give you an idea, in Florida, the Democratic edge in the 6 months up to election was 50,000 in 2004, 125,000 in 2012, 75,000 in 2016. It's minus 100,000. Republicans have the edge for the first time ever and by a big margin in the lead up to an election in Florida. North Carolina, the advantage was 16,000 in 2004, 120,000 in 2012, net even in 2016. Republicans have over 115,000 edge in 2020. I mean, in those, we're seeing not only unprecedented Republican enthusiasm, we're seeing in some of these states unprecedented low Democratic enthusiasm. So the gap is the most pro-Republican gap it has ever been, not only in terms of general voter registration in these states, but in terms of voter registration enthusiasm over the last 6 months, as reflected in their actual behavior. Similar data out of Nevada. In Nevada in 2004, it was about even. In 2012, Obama had a more than doubled the Republican late registration edge. Yep. In 2016, Democrats still had an edge, a substantial edge, but nothing like 2012. In 2020, Republicans have the edge. I mean, again, these are states that are supposed to be trending Democratic in the case of Nevada. Nevada is no more Democratic in 2020 in voter registration than it was in 2016. In fact, as a percentage basis, it's less.
It's less as a percentage.
And by the way, this goes to seniors, because one of the things I've been tracking is supposedly seniors are pro-Biden. And I looked at 2 things. One, I looked at
the state you're looking at. Depends what state you're looking at. They're different in Michigan, you know.
Well, yeah, I'm just skeptical of it. I think they're getting bad sampling. And the reason I'm saying that is twofold. One, in looking at like polls, comparing like polls, they're like Pew, for example, showing almost the same thing they were showing in 2016. Marist is showing the same thing as 2016. So there's a bunch of polls that when I can compare using the same mode, same method, same pollster, they're showing no senior shit. YouGov, they're not showing a big senior shift that other people are. The other factor is here's the voter registration trends in states where I have age profiles, and in Florida and Arizona, and Florida and Nevada at least. I don't have the age profile of Pennsylvania and other ones, but I can tell you something inferred by those. In those states, older voters are registering more Republican than they are in the past. So now I think some part of this polling shift is your older boomers are now in the senior category.
Yep.
silent generation voters, and they were always a Trump skeptical group. So I think they're overrepresented in the senior share. But from what I'm seeing in voter,
you may be right, because we've looked at why we've been tighter, or in some cases a tiny Biden lead in seniors, and it's you may be right with that, Robert. And by the way, in Florida, Nate Cohn did the same thing in Florida with Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis. Oh, Ron DeSantis is doing so much worse with seniors. In the end, he thumped him, right? So it's just we had it too, though. What we have 50-40 or something like that did not turn out to be.
I think it's exact, and I think it's basically, for whatever reason, a group of seniors has dropped out of, in my view, the polling samples. And as I think older voters that are disproportionately Trumpish are not showing up, because the voter registration data I have available by age profile in Nevada actually shows a major shift towards Trump among seniors. The same thing in some of the voter file data I have for Florida. And by inference of where voters are moving Republican in Pennsylvania, it almost has to be the case that older voters are trending Republican.
You may want me to interrupt you for this. I just saw this now. I didn't even realize this. Your assistant says she has an urgent inquiry for you. It's kind of funny.
Right. You can.
Is that cool? All right. I just wanted to pass it on. All right, because for her to call me, maybe it's something I don't know. But I just saw that.
It's something that can happen.
Okay. And yeah, so I mean, it's also we see some of this in Pennsylvania, Robert. We do. It's same, and in Michigan this happened. And then in the final 2 weeks, because I was thinking in Michigan, we saw the same thing happening. It was definitely a shift in seniors to Republicans in Michigan, leading up to last cycle's presidential election. And they were like ancestral Democrats, white, right? Not the Reagan Democrat, like people will say, because the Reagan Democrat is 30, 40 years dead, right? Or 20 years dead at that point, right? So they're like, they bring this up. But yeah, it was something else. And in the end, that changed dramatically. And there was also a large share who said they were undecided. We're getting that now, too, with the exception of younger people. It's weird because Trump is doing worse among younger people than he did in 2016 in Pennsylvania, and obviously a little worse among seniors. But those are the two groups that are most undecided. And then when you'll see the crosstabs, do they approve of him? Are they comfortable talking with pollsters? And we keep getting asked whether or not we factor in the hidden Trump vote. We don't really do that, but we do try to show people by asking these questions. And we got 3 we got to get through. We do just try to show people, right, that it is possible that Trump could be up a little bit more in Florida, right? When we went over the Florida poll, he could be, it could be a little closer than people think in Pennsylvania, because there's no doubt, Robert. I'm glad you asked with this question here too, and the ones before. Are you comfortable talking? We've asked different kinds of questions like that before. This is really, though, starting to shine a light on me. Like, basically, there's no doubt. Now, I think it exists. Now, there's an open debate as to how big of a percentage we are talking about, but it doesn't make any sense in my mind why somebody tells me they strongly or somewhat approve of him, right? And then even somewhat disapprove. But then will tell me they're uncomfortable talking to pollsters. They believe in a big shy Trump vote, right? Look at that right there, 65.1% in the raw, in the weighted thus far. It's amazing how much weighting can change a top-line result of the presidential election, but barely budge some of these other questions, because it tells you there's a strong, broad consensus. So it only went down to like 64.5. Still an overwhelming, almost super majority tell us they believe there's definitely a large group of people out there who are lying to us. There's definitely, or are shy. Maybe they're not lying. They're just shy. And then in that other group, this is the biggest we found so far, folks, people who say they're uncomfortable with pollsters. That's a third with Pennsylvania. Look at strangers, Robert, almost half. I mean, really, that's the biggest group we've seen yet. And then the last thing I wanted to hit on before was trade, because it is 418 and I'll forget. All right. Look at this. I mean, the media madness over, oh my God, he's tariffing everybody, right? Do you support or oppose the use of tariffs as leverage in trade negotiations with other nations? 47% support, 21% oppose. And then when it comes to NAFTA, there's a lot of people who are unsure. And this is because the people in Chester County, the people in Delaware County and Montgomery County, they don't know what the hell we're talking about. But the people out in Luzerne know what we're talking about. The burbs in Allegheny that Robert was just talking about, they know what we're talking about, right, Robert? And Monroe, for instance, which Trump is flipping. It appears Trump is flipping Monroe County in our polling, which was one of the last ones to hold on. That is 2-1 among people who know. It's actually more than 2-1. And I got to tell you, because one of the comments, I'm a little bit stunned at the Philly stuff too, folks, that his vote share is a little high in Philly. But again, it's actually, we have bigger samples in those areas than when you do in a place like Lackawanna, where I don't think Joe Biden is doing that good. So some things can be, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They iron out, Robert. There's a bigger sampling error for subgroups, right? So, it is what it is.
Yeah, well, and Lackawanna, I think, is where you have, I think it's West Scranton that's very Democratic and can oversample in a poll. So whereas Lucerne,
and you'll see that it happened. Yeah,
and that's one of the other things I look at. Like, it's hard to oversample Democratic voters within black voters, because a lot of your working class black voters, they're representative. We're talking to one is representative of 100,000 and so forth. Same with Hispanic voters. And what's interesting to me is that subsamples of high school educated whites, subsamples of high school educated African Americans, subsamples of high school educated Hispanics are all showing pro-Trump trends over 2016. So going back, if you look at the old primary participation models, it's been accurate 5 for 5 when it disagreed with polls. You look at voter registration trends over a 4-year time period, it's been more accurate than polls in every single election. If you look at voter registration trends in terms of projecting turnout shares in the last 6 months of an election, it has been more accurate than polls in every single election. And there's been dozens of opportunities over the past 10 plus years. To give you an example, Pennsylvania, Democrats way outnumbered Republicans in voter registration enthusiasm in the 6 months leading up to 2018. So that number has completely flipped, and not just flipped, it's 3-1 in favor of Republicans. To give people an idea, that's never happened before. When you're seeing people like Nate Cohn say, I don't know how he can make up for this suburban gap, real easy. Just the way they have in voter registration. I mean, you could lose 100,000 votes out of the Philly suburbs, but if you're gaining more than 300,000 in the rest of the state, well, 300,000 is more than 100,000.
That's right.
And so that's where that data is. So you add all of that, you aggregate that, and the other component is Sean Trendy does a Washington primary analysis, and he actually, and he admitted this in his piece, he went to look at it thinking what he looks at the Washington gubernatorial primary, the August before the presidential election, and compares it to the party vote share in the prior presidential election, because he's found that the trends within the state of Washington have been predictive of the trends nationwide.
Yeah.
And he originally looked at the data believing it was going to show something that would be pro-Biden. So he didn't even go in looking at the data hoping to find something pro-Trump. But what he found was that the Republican share of the gubernatorial primary vote in Washington was better in 2020 than it was in 2016, which has historically been another key indicator of actual public voting behavior of certain like demographic groups, because in Washington you have Seattle, which is professional class suburban, and then you have a lot of rural working class, and you even have a working class part of the county, a county that's right south of King County. That gives you some sense of, it has some Italians, has some Irish, it has some of the same ethnic voting groups as other parts of particularly the upper Midwest and the industrial Midwest. And if you looked at so when I saw that, I was like, I bet there was a same trend that I'm seeing in Pennsylvania, I'm seeing in Florida, I'm seeing in North Carolina, I'm seeing in Nevada. I bet that same trend shows up in the primary. And I saw the presidential primary participation rates on both sides in 2016. Huge excitement, enthusiasm for Trump. I mean, these polls are saying that there's double-digit dissatisfaction with Trump amongst Republicans, and they're going to vote for Biden.
That tells you everything about where they polled. That's
exactly. Why couldn't a William Weld, a serious candidate with media backing, get more than 5% in Pennsylvania then? Why couldn't he get more than single digits anywhere he ran? I mean, he struggled to get double digits in Massachusetts, his home state. where he'd been governor. So that gives you an idea. And remember, Weld was the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party in 2016.
Right. He's got name rec. I mean, there's no
poll that's showing more Democratic unity than Republican unity polled the wrong Democrats and polled the wrong.
And folks, that's happening. That has happened to us. We know it's easy for it to happen. It's easy to make that mistake. The AP GFK poll. It was its final poll late October, at the end of October. It was Hillary plus 14. It showed 79% base consolidation for Donald Trump. That's it. It showed 90+% for Hillary Clinton, and Hillary had a big lead among independents. That is who they polled, where they polled, and that is what happened to them. And it's happened to us. Just to give you a little confirmation, I'll peel out and nest the variables to get you the white working class alone. All right. But in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is crushing him 55-35, not just whites, all voters who do not have a college degree, 55-35. And that was one of the main things I wanted to either confirm or not be able to confirm when we were talking and watching all these other polls in Pennsylvania, because I went on the Hill TV and they asked me, did you see this in Western Pennsylvania? He's doing worse than Romney. I'm like, that's bullcrap. And I was as nice as I could possibly be, folks, to have that kind of a shift. And for Connor Lamb to be on TV and for Ed Rendell to be privately telling people that Joe Biden's NAFTA vote is going to hurt him badly among these people they will not forget. You have to wait for them to die. They're not going to forget what you did.
Even the kids are the same way, because they've seen it happen. They've seen that their opportunities that their parents had, they don't have, and they blame this. So it's why the big shifting group is. I think what's going to happen is young vote's going to be very low. Old elderly vote's going to be the same. The shift is going to happen between 30 to 60. Yeah, particularly your Gen Xers.
That's funny you said that.
And your younger boomers, your Gen Xers and younger boomers, who are, by the way, the group that feel the most betrayed by what happened on trade, by what happened on energy, by what happened on the Democratic Party writ large.
We have them a little bit higher. We do.
Yeah, he's going to do better. And a lot of the internals have been showing that. And they've just been ignoring what that means and its keys.
They're also about 3% more of the vote this time.
Oh, yes, I think it's going to be higher. That's where enthusiasm is going to matter. Seniors are always the same turnout. If they weren't going to budge in 04 or 08 or 2012 or 2016, folks, they ain't going to suddenly increase
21%. And in 18, they jumped as a large share. But I mean, that's because it was a midterm, and that happens in presidential cycles.
They're always great because they always vote at the same rate. So they're a greater or lesser share based on what other age groups are doing. They're always going to vote at the same rate. So the question is, what are the people under 60 doing? So, and what I think is going to happen is, I don't think the elderly share of the vote will be higher, because I think the youth vote will be down, but I think the 30 to 60-year-old vote will be up. I think what's going to happen is your Gen X, younger boomer, working class, white, more male than female voter is going to disproportionately replace your millennial Zoomer who was in the poll or potentially in the 2016 pool.
It's 49-51 gender breakdown statewide right now, Rob. I mean, it could be 48-52, but I really think we're right with this. It's 49-51.
You look at voter registration, you look at enthusiasm, you look at self-reported very close interest in the election. Those numbers show the smallest gender gap they've shown that I've ever seen. So, and again, the key, as you've been emphasizing, the highest in 2012. The highest turnout group that traditionally did not have high turnout were working class African American women. The big group in 2020 is going to be urban, particularly. In 2020, it's going to be a working class non-Hispanic white man over the age of 35. It's going to turn out at the highest rate they ever have, and there's a lot of vote there to still be grabbed.
It's like where these votes get left on the table, Robert, with people who are like adult populations eligible but never vote. You know, that is something I honestly think in 2016 Trump got some of these people. They were like loosely affiliated. Maybe they voted Bush v. Kerry and then sat the rest out and have been out in a long time. There was a group that we identified in our polling in 2016, and Trump clobbered her with that group. They weren't new. They just were not in there. And there's still a ton of that on the table that people just don't, They don't vote. They just don't vote. I mean, and every time, because it's weird. We always talk about, oh, well, if we get more people registered, it's necessarily good for Democrats. And people made that mistake in 2016. There were people who were not affiliated. And a lot of polls, they screened them out because they would look at their vote history or something and they'd say, this guy's not showing up. And they did. And it can change a lot. It can, and right now, just to give people, it's 4:30. I guess I got to kind of bug out at 4:30, but we should maybe, Robert, if we have more time, I don't know, maybe we can sneak a little show in once this is processed and we can go over this in detail, because this is really cool. I can't wait to nest those white working class. It's going to be 65-35, Robert. It's going to be, because he's
well, to give people an idea, just 2 brief points before we wrap for today, to go to your enthusiasm point. In places like Pennsylvania, the highest it ever got for Republican registrations was in the 150,000 range. Trump has doubled that.
He's doubled it. Yeah.
And that means that's going to be new voters, is my view. Because they're just registering. In other words, you're seeing record-setting levels of Republican registration on the eve of the election. Not just over the last 4 years, on the eve of the election. That's how Republicans are out registering Democrats in Miami-Dade over the last few months.
I'm wondering, Robert, if some of this independent vote isn't going to be a lot less. I'm really not kidding. Maybe 15%. A bunch of working class, newly registered Republican men that are going to be turning out. They're already showing that. They showed that in the presidential primary participation rate. They hinted at that, at over participation rates for an uncontested primary. And they're showing it again in their voter registration. And to give one last example, going back to the Washington data, I looked at white working class counties and areas in Washington to see whether that's where the shift came from. So, for example, in the suburbs, Democrats in King County did 11 points better in the partisan gap between 2016 and 2020. And on average ran 4 to 5 points better in all of the other upper middle class counties and areas. So how then did they lose voter share? Yeah.
Well, they ran 10 to 20 points behind in rural working class areas. And that's an improvement over 2016. So what that's signaling is you're going to see double-digit improvements for Trump amongst white working class voters in rural, small-town, industrial America. And that's why, for what we can wrap on, as of now, I'm advising people bet Donald Trump for the president.
There's Robert's bet for the week. And we should do another little, because there's going to be so much to go through once I'm done processing this. I don't want to give away too much because things will confuse people. But just going through, it's gonna be, here I am again, 4 years later. I thought this would be better, but here I am again. I'm going to show a competitive race. People are going to have a heart attack. It's competitive. I don't know what to tell you. It's competitive. I don't know. You're like polling an electorate that doesn't exist. Man, Laura's always like, Rich, this is just going to happen every 4. I'm like, damn, Laura, damn, here we go again. Because this is trying to stay within the realm of reality. Guys, I'll leave you with this. Joe Biden's going to beat Donald Trump by a bigger margin than Barack Obama beat John McCain. That's it. I'll leave you there. All right. So look, don't forget to follow Robert right there. It's just like his handle in the corner of the screen, Barnes @Barnes_law. You can follow me @Peoples_Pundit. And Arizona's next. We're almost there. We raised actually a little bit too much for Pennsylvania. So I took that money, put it over to Arizona on Inside the Numbers tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Guys, don't want to miss this because we're going to go over real quick, couple of minutes to do financials. I'm just going to show people this is how much we raised for Florida. This is what was spent. This is how much we raised for Pennsylvania. This is what we spent. Shifted some over to Arizona like I just previewed, and we're almost there. So if you want to contribute and get us there, you can do so by going to paypal.me/peoplespundit, or you could do venmo.com/peoplespundit because that was requested. All right, we're really close to Arizona, Robert. Who the hell knows? Maybe we can even circle back, get another round in. It would be nice because things do change. Last time in 2016, that race changed October 24th. Things just started happening. And I was like, oh, crap. This race is shit. And it was almost poised to do it. And it did. So we won't want to miss a movement like that if it does happen. All right. So Inside the Numbers tomorrow at 10, folks. We're going to leave you with that. Thanks for watching What Are the Odds? All the best. And we will see you some point next this week, 10 a.m. tomorrow, Inside the Numbers.
The lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway, restless nights